Hey there, tonight we're uncovering why it sucked to be a medieval cook. Not the fairy tale version you know, but a reality where the kitchen was as perilous as any battlefield. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy. Maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. The morning light barely peeks through the castle windows when you're already knee-deep in the chaos of the medieval kitchen. Forget snooze buttons. Your day kicks off at a time when roosters are still considering their options. As a medieval cook, you're not just juggling pots and pans, you're performing a daily dance of survival in the culinary underworld. Welcome to the 13th century, where the title cook is less about celebrity chefs and more about being the unsung hero of sustenance. Your day starts long before the nobility even dreams of breakfast. The market opens at dawn, and you're there, bleary-eyed and bargaining for every scrap of vegetable, chunk of meat, and yes, if you're lucky, a dash of those precious spices that make your dishes a cut above the peasant fare. Saffron isn't growing on trees, after all. It costs more than its weight in gold, literally. Back then, a pound of saffron could set you back more than a horse, and yet you're expected to sprinkle it like fairy dust. But it's not just about the spices. The whole economic system is set up to keep you on your toes and out of the spotlight. You're at the bottom of the social ladder, and no amount of seasoning can change that. You're juggling the high expectations of your lord's palate with the constraints of a budget that would make a modern accountant weep. Grain, the staple of any medieval diet, is subject to the whims of the harvest, and a bad season could mean cutting corners or worse, cutting meals. Fuel is another ball in your air-juggling act. It's not just lying around waiting for you to light it. Wood has to be chopped and carted, and in some places it's more precious than the food itself. A cord of wood can cost a week's wages, and that's if you can find it. The Black Death had a way of messing with supply chains, reducing the population, and thus the available labor, by about a third. Talk about a market disruption. Now let's talk about the physicality of your job. Today's cooks might complain about standing in a hot kitchen, but medieval cooking is an Olympic sport. You're not just stirring pots, you're hauling cauldrons that weigh more than your average donkey. Roasting a pig takes hours of turning on a spit, and you're the one turning it with sweat and muscle, not a fancy electric motor. And bread. Don't even get started on bread. It means waking up even earlier to knead dough and stoke the fire in the bread oven. No bread machines here, my friend. And while we're busting myths, let's dispel the idea that medieval banquets were all about heaping platters and endless goblets of wine. Sure, the lords and ladies might feast heartily, but for you, it's a relentless cycle of preparation and cleanup. The leftovers from their tables might trickle down to you, but don't count on it. You're more likely to end the day with a bowl of pottage than a slice of roast. The social hierarchy is as rigid as the castle walls. You're not likely to move up the ladder, no matter how many compliments your mutton stew receives. Cooks are essential but invisible, as much a fixture of the kitchen as the soot-stained walls. The kitchen itself is a microcosm of medieval society. There's the head cook, perhaps a bit of a tyrant or a reluctant leader, overseeing a team of assistant cooks and scullions. Everyone knows their place, and questioning it could mean a quick exit out the back door. Economic pressures and physical demands aside, there's also the constant threat of displeasing your patrons. A dish too cold, too hot, too bland, or too spicy could mean more than just a bad Yelp review. It could mean dismissal or worse, punishment. The stakes are high, and so is the stress. It's a fine line between culinary genius and disgrace. Yet despite the grind, there's a certain satisfaction in feeding an entire household, a small community really. You're part of a greater whole, keeping the wheels of the medieval world turning, one meal at a time. And so, as the sun sets and the last of the dishes are cleaned, you take a moment to rest. Tomorrow, the cycle begins anew, with its own challenges and small victories. In the grand tapestry of history, you may be just a humble cook, but you're a vital thread, holding it all together with a wooden spoon and a bit of grit. And just when you think you've got a handle on this medieval cooking gig, let's take a stroll through the kitchen where all this culinary magic, or madness, happens. Welcome to the medieval kitchen, where surviving a day without burning your eyebrows off is a triumph in itself. Forget about non-stick pans and temperature-controlled ovens. No, you're dealing with open hearths that are as temperamental as a cat on a heart tin roof. Let's start with the hearth, the beating, fiery heart of your kitchen. It's not just a place to cook, it's a place to dodge potential third-degree burns. Open flames mean every meal comes with a side of danger. Forget about the modern fear of overcooking your soufflé. Here, it's more about avoiding setting your tunic on fire while you try to roast that goose. Speaking of roasting, you've got your trusty spit, a long metal rod that holds the meat over the fire. It's manual labor at its finest, requiring constant turning so the meat cooks evenly. An uneven roast is more than a culinary faux pas. It's an invitation for food poisoning, and let's be honest, medieval medicine isn't exactly renowned for its effectiveness. Your tools are rudimentary, to put it mildly. A cauldron for boiling, a mortar and pestle for grinding those precious spices, and a knife that probably doubles as a weapon in a pinch. Utensils are sparse. Wooden spoons are your best friends, though they're also prone to catching fire if left too close to the flames. Now, let's debunk the myth of the grand medieval feast. Sure, the nobility might indulge in lavish banquets with peacock pies and sugared almonds, but the reality is, most meals are repetitive and basic. Pottage, a thick soup of vegetables and grains, is the daily staple, and if you're lucky, it might contain a bit of meat. A medieval cook's life is a never-ending cycle of chopping, boiling, and hoping your humble offerings appease the finicky palates of those above you. Ingredient availability is a constant headache. Forget about a quick run to the store. Everything depends on the harvest, which is as unpredictable as the weather. Grain, the backbone of any meal, can be scarce, especially if a particularly bad storm has swept through the land. Remember, the little ice age is just around the corner, and it's going to throw some serious curveballs at your already precarious pantry. Let's talk economics for a moment. A pound of meat might cost you half a day's wage, and that's assuming you even have access to it. Most of what you cook will be dictated by what's cheap and available. Vegetables, grains, and the occasional fish from the local stream are your bread and butter, literally. And speaking of bread, it's a luxury for the rich. The rest of us are stuck with rye or barley, dense and tough enough to double as a weapon in a pinch. The medieval kitchen is not just a place of labor, it's a crucible of survival and innovation. You're constantly adapting, improvising, and praying that today's meal won't be your last in this gig. The social hierarchy is palpable here too. The head cook might be the king of this little kingdom, but even they answer to the whims of the lord or lady of the household. A bad meal could mean demotion, or worse, expulsion. And in a world where your job is your lifeline, that's a risk no one wants to take. While the tales of grand feasts and endless indulgence have their appeal, the truth is far more grounded, and in many ways far more impressive. The ability to create something nourishing, and sometimes even delicious out of limited resources and constant danger, is nothing short of heroic. So as you navigate your way through this medieval culinary minefield, remember that you're not just cooking, you're surviving, innovating, and occasionally, when the stars align, thriving. But don't get too comfortable just yet. Tomorrow's another day, with its own set of challenges, and perhaps, just maybe, a glimmer of satisfaction at a job well done. After all, in the grand theater of medieval life, even the smallest victories are worth savoring. So, after surviving yet another day in this medieval culinary gauntlet, let's dive into the juicy bits of what really went on behind those soot-stained kitchen doors. First off, the social dynamics in your medieval household are a stew of tension, ambition, and the occasional whiff of something a bit more unsavory. The kitchen is a battleground of social hierarchy, where even the rats scurrying around know their place. You, as the cook, are the linchpin of this operation, the unsung hero who ensures that the lord and his entourage can feast without a hitch. But let's be real, your existence is more precariously balanced than a soufflé on a shaky table. The head honcho in the kitchen, often a head cook or master cook, is your immediate superior, and they're not about to let you forget it. Think of them as a culinary emperor ruling over a realm of boiling pots and perpetually hungry mouths. They're responsible for the menu, the allocation of ingredients, and importantly, keeping the Lord's whims satisfied, lest the whole kitchen staff find themselves on the wrong side of a dismissal notice. Now, while the head cook might be the big cheese in the kitchen, Even they have someone to answer to, the lord or lady of the manor. This noble oversight means every dish you prepare is more than just sustenance. It's a political statement. The food served at every meal reflects the wealth, power, and status of the household. In other words, your career hinges on making sure the mutton stew not only tastes good, but also acts as a metaphorical flex of the lord's economic muscle. Economic factors play a huge role in what's on the menu. Remember that the medieval economy is a roller coaster of feast or famine, quite literally. When times are good and the harvests are plentiful, your kitchen might see an influx of ingredients that would make a modern foodie swoon. But when those times turn sour, so does the mood in your kitchen. Fail to impress your patrons during a lean season, and you might find yourself out on the street faster than you can say pardage. Let's not forget the political climate that influences your daily grind. Take the 100 Years' War, for instance, a period of intermittent conflict that stretched from 1337 to 1453. The war put a strain on resources, with taxes rising to fund the endless battles. As a cook, you'd find yourself juggling these economic shifts, trying to scrape together meals that would keep the household happy without breaking the bank. A bad decision here could mean more than a disappointed dining room. It might just mean the end of your tenure in that household. And here's the kicker. Primary sources from the time, like the Le Ménager de Paris, a medieval household book from the late 14th century, reveal that the expectations placed on cooks were as high as the stakes. This guidebook reads like a culinary Bible, outlining recipes, cooking methods, and household management tips. It's one of the few peeks we have into the day-to-day operations of a medieval kitchen, and it doesn't sugarcoat the consequences of failure. A burnt roast or undercooked pie could lead to anything from a stern talking to outright dismissal. In some cases, it wasn't just your job on the line, but sometimes even harsher penalties, depending on who you worked for and how badly you messed up. In this world of high expectations and low margins for error, the pressure to perform is relentless. Your career as a cook is subject to the whims of the weather, the economy, and the Lord's ever-changing tastes. It's a high-wire act with no safety net, where job security is as scarce as a summer snowfall. But despite the chaos and constant threat of failure, there's a certain thrill to it all. A good meal could elevate you to hero status, even if just for a moment, in the eyes of your peers. And though the Lord may never personally pat you on the back, the knowledge that your skills are keeping the whole operation running smoothly is its own kind of reward. So, as the embers in the hearth smolder down to their last, you prepare to do it all over again tomorrow. Your role may be fraught with challenges, but it's also one where a bit of ingenuity and a dash of courage could see you through. In the grand scheme of medieval life, the cook's job is a testament to resilience and resourcefulness, a dance on the knife's edge of survival. And with that, as you set down your wooden spoon and wipe the sweat from your brow, remember, in this medieval world, you're not just cooking, you're crafting a legacy, one dish at a time. The kitchen may be a place of toil, but it's also a stage where history is served up with every meal. Tomorrow, the curtain rises once more on your culinary theatre, and who knows what the next act will bring. But before you roll up your sleeves and dive into tomorrow's culinary chaos, let's pause for a moment to consider the medieval cook's eternal nemesis, food preservation. In an era where refrigerators were as fantastical as flying carpets, the battle to keep food from spoiling was as crucial as keeping the Lord's temper from boiling over. In the 13th century, your kitchen was a veritable chemistry lab of medieval ingenuity. Salt was the reigning monarch of preservation methods, and not just because it added a bit of flavor. This crystalline treasure was key to keeping meat edible beyond the slaughterhouse. But let's not romanticize it. Salt was precious, almost as valuable as gold. A 14th century record from England shows that a bushel of salt could set you back as much as a skilled laborer's weekly wage. Salting meat involved rubbing it down like a medieval spa treatment, then packing it into barrels where it could last for months, or at least until the rats got wind of it. Then there's the pickling process, which turned your kitchen into a scene straight out of a witch's cauldron. Vinegar, another preservation hero, was used to pickle vegetables, fruits, and even meat. The acidity kept bacteria at bay, though the taste was enough to make anyone's face pucker harder than a lemon. But hey, when fresh food was a luxury, pickled onions were practically gourmet. Smoking was another trick up your sleeve. Imagine the kitchen filled with enough smoke to make a dragon weep, as fish and meats hung like bizarre chandeliers to cure above the hearth. It was a delicate balance of heat and patience, turning fresh catches into long-lasting provisions. Still, the process was far from foolproof. A slip-up could mean your prized salmon ended up smelling more like a burnt offering than a culinary delight. As for dairy, cheese and butter were less about indulgence and more about necessity. Milk, fresh from the udder, was a ticking time bomb. Cheesemaking transformed it into a more stable form, with varieties ranging from soft and creamy to something that could double as a doorstop. Butter, meanwhile, was churned with a fervor that would put any gym workout to shame, though it had to be stored carefully to avoid turning rancid faster than you could say, yuck. Now, let's debunk the myth of the ever-fresh medieval feast, complete with endless platters of succulent meats and vibrant vegetables. Sure, the tapestries show groaning tables, but the reality was often far grimmer. The scarcity of fresh ingredients meant a lot of your cooking revolved around making the old seem new again. Leftovers were reincarnated into pottages and pies, often with a generous seasoning of spices to mask any questionable odors. The risks of spoilage were omnipresent, a constant specter in your daily routine. Foodborne illnesses were as common as the sunrise, with symptoms that sent more than a few to an early grave. The medieval medical understanding was about as advanced as a blindfolded archer, leaving you to rely on trial, error, and a healthy dose of prayer. Take, for example, the infamous stinking goose incident recorded in the 13th century annals of a certain English manor. A shipment of geese, poorly salted and stored, arrived more green than grey, leading to a feast with consequences as dire as a Shakespearean tragedy. The cook was blamed, of course, a convenient scapegoat in an age where admitting the limits of preservation techniques was less popular than leech-based medicine. Despite the risks and the realities, there's an undeniable romance to the medieval feast. The idea of gathering around a table, sharing stories and sustenance, is as appealing now as it was then. The truth, however, is that those feasts were the exception, not the norm. Most days you were more likely to be scraping the bottom of the barrel, literally. In this precarious world of scarcity and spoilage, innovation was your best ally. Every trick you learned, every method you mastered, was another day you and your kitchen survived. Whether it was layering lard over a pot of pottage to seal it from air or storing grains in well-sealed containers to keep out pests, each strategy was a testament to human ingenuity in the face of nature's challenges. And so, as you hang up your apron for the night, contemplate the delicate dance of preservation you perform daily. It's a testament to your skill and adaptability, a never-ending battle against time and decay. Yet, in the grand scheme of things, it's just one more thread in the tapestry of your life as a medieval cook. Tomorrow, the cycle continues, and who knows? Perhaps someday, someone will invent a magical box that keeps food cold, making your nightly worries seem as quaint as a fairy tale. But until then, it's you, your wits, and a pantry full of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. So, as you hang up your apron for the night, contemplate the delicate dance of preservation you perform daily. It's a testament to your skill and adaptability, a never-ending battle against time and decay. Yet, in the grand scheme of things, it's just one more thread in the tapestry of your life as a medieval cook. Tomorrow, the cycle continues, and who knows? Perhaps someday, someone will invent a magical box that keeps food cold, making your nightly worries seem as quaint as a fairy tale. But until then, it's you, your wits, and a pantry full of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Now, let's zoom out and take a good look at the big picture here. Medieval cooks like you may not have had the celebrity status of today's culinary stars, but let's not make any mistake about it. They were the backbone of the entire social structure. Sure, the lords and ladies were the faces of the feasts, but without the cooks, they'd be reduced to gnawing on raw turnips. The kitchen was the real kingdom, and you were the ruler of its smoky, bustling empire. In a time when the divide between the haves and have-nots was as wide as the English Channel, cooks were the bridge, albeit a wobbly one, between the two. You took the raw bounty of the land and transformed it into palatable and sometimes even decadent fare. Your daily grind was a microcosm of medieval society, a place where class, economy, and survival intersected. And let's not forget the spice game. those precious grains of paradise that could catapult a dish from mundane to magnificent. You were a magician with saffron, a wizard with cloves, and an alchemist with cinnamon, all of which cost more than a casual fling with a noble's purse. But here's where we tackle the myths head-on. The romanticized notion of medieval banquets as never-ending orgies of culinary delight is about as accurate as the idea that knights spent all day rescuing damsels in distress. The truth was far grittier. The average meal was a humble affair, with pottage and bread forming the bulk of sustenance. And while the upper echelons did enjoy lavish feasts, those were rare events, not the daily norm. Most of the time, you were making do with whatever was in season, whatever the harvest gods decided to bless or curse you with. Yet the mythology persists, fueled by centuries of storytelling and a human love for nostalgia. We've all seen those paintings of grand tables heaped with grapes, peacocks, and goblets overflowing with wine. But those images are as airbrushed as a modern magazine cover. The reality, more often, it was a balancing act of using salt to preserve, smoke to flavor, and sheer will to create something edible out of the ordinary. Despite the harsh realities, medieval cooks demonstrated an astounding level of resilience and ingenuity. They adapted to the challenges of their time with a creativity that would put today's master chef contestants to shame. They were the unsung heroes of culinary innovation, transforming scraps into sustenance and scarcity into opportunity. Every meal was a testament to their resourcefulness, and their legacy is alive in the kitchens of today, where root-to-stem cooking and zero-waste movements echo their age-old practices. And let's not skip over the lasting impact these culinary warriors had on the traditions that followed. The medieval kitchen was a crucible of change, where new techniques were forged in the fires of necessity. The art of spicing, for instance, has left an indelible mark on cuisines worldwide. Those same spices that once cost a fortune are now staples in pantries across the globe. Sausages, pies, and stews, these weren't just meals. They were solutions to problems that modern refrigeration and preservation have long since solved. Now, let's take a moment to ponder the human element in all this. Facing each day's challenges with nothing but a wooden spoon and a prayer, medieval cooks embodied a kind of grit and determination that's inspirational even in our time. They remind us that in any era, creativity often blooms brightest under pressure. They were not just keeping the castle fed. They were nurturing the very culture that flourished around the dining table, a culture that would evolve and adapt through the ages. So, as you close the kitchen doors tonight and step into the medieval twilight, give a nod to those who came before. They may not have had the luxury of modern conveniences, but they laid the groundwork for the culinary arts that would follow. Their lives were a testament to the power of perseverance, the strength of creativity, and the simple joy of a meal well prepared. In the grand tapestry of history, their role was as fundamental as the spices they cherished. In the end, while the myths of grandeur and opulence continue to dazzle, it's the reality, the grit, the ingenuity of the medieval cook that truly deserves to be celebrated. They were the silent architects of a culinary legacy, crafting dishes with the precision of a knight's sword and the care of a monk's illumination. Their spirit lives on in every kitchen, a reminder that behind every great feast lies a tale of triumph over the mundane. And so, as you hang up your apron for the last time tonight, take pride in the fact that you're part of a rich tradition that spans centuries. Whether it's the sizzle of the hearth or the aroma of spices, the echoes of the past resonate in every flavor and every bite. Tomorrow, as you step back into the kitchen, remember that you're not just cooking, you're keeping a legacy alive, one meal at a time. In a world where being a king meant wielding power like a toddler with a crayon, recklessly and occasionally on the walls, Alexander the Great's early years were anything but ordinary. Born in 356 BCE in Pella, the heart of ancient Macedonia, he was destined for greatness, or at least that's what his PR team wanted everyone to think. His father, King Philip Roman II, was no slouch in the power department, having turned Macedonia from a backwater kingdom into a formidable military machine. But let's not get too gushy about Philip. He also had a penchant for marrying like it was an Olympic event, ending up with 7 wives. You could say the man had commitment issues, or maybe just a very complex family tree. Now, Alexander wasn't your average kid playing with wooden swords and dreaming of dragons. Nope, he had a real-life lion to play with. Legend has it, young Alex tamed a wild horse named Bucephalus, a steed that had a serious attitude problem, much like a teenager's mood swings. The story goes that Alexander, at just 12, noticed the horse was afraid of its own shadow. Turning the beast towards the sun, he calmed it enough to ride. It sounds like the kind of tall tale that makes for great storytelling but terrible insurance risks. Enter Aristotle, the brainiac of ancient Greece. Imagine having a philosopher as your personal tutor. While most kids were learning their ABCs, Alexander was getting the equivalent of an Ivy League education in philosophy, science, and politics. Aristotle wasn't just any old tutor. He was a man who thought the Earth was the center of the universe, and that eels didn't reproduce. Hey, nobody's perfect. Under Aristotle's watchful eye, Alexander absorbed more knowledge than a history PhD student pulling an all-nighter. King Philip wasn't just grooming a son, he was crafting a successor. He made sure Alexander was well-versed in the art of war, which was more of a necessity than a hobby given the geopolitical climate. The Macedonian army was the family business, and business was booming. At just 16, Alexander was left in charge of Macedonia, while Philip waged war elsewhere. When the Thracians, clearly not great at reading the room, decided to rebel, Alexander responded by burning their city to the ground and founding a new one, Cassandreia. Talk about a fiery debut. But let's not kid ourselves. While Alexander's early life reads like a superhero origin story, it was also a carefully cultivated image. Philip and his court were the original spin doctors, crafting a narrative that would make Alexander seem like a mythical figure. That story about taming Bucephalus. It's a great tale, but also a perfect metaphor for the kind of leader they wanted him to be seen as. Fearless, clever, and slightly unhinged. The kind of guy who could tame a horse, a country, or an empire, depending on the day. Alexander's relationship with his father was, let's say, complex. Philip was an alpha king, and Alexander a rising star, and the two didn't always see eye to eye. When Philip married Cleopatra Eurydice, a Macedonian noblewoman, not the Egyptian queen, mind you, young Alex wasn't thrilled. The marriage threatened his status as heir, and the ensuing family drama was worthy of a Greek tragedy, complete with murder plots and accusations at the dinner table. Yet, despite the domestic turbulence, Alexander emerged as a seasoned leader. By age 18, he commanded a section of the Macedonian army at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE, where he played a key role in crushing the Greek city-states. Alexander's charge through the sacred band of Thebes, a group of elite soldiers and, interestingly, lovers, was legendary. For those keeping score, that's 2 cities founded and 1 legendary military unit obliterated before he was old enough to legally drink in modern times. In these early years, the groundwork was laid for a leader who would later conquer much of the known world. But let's not forget, much of what we know about Alexander comes from sources like Plutarch and Arrian, who wrote centuries after his death. They painted him as a demigod for the ages, but their accounts are as much myth as history, dotted with exaggerations that would make even a seasoned tabloid editor blush. So, was young Alexander truly a prodigy, or simply the beneficiary of some ancient world marketing genius? The truth, as always, is probably a little of both, but one thing is clear. Alexander's early life was a cocktail of ambition, education, and the occasional teenage rebellion, shaken and stirred into a potent mix that was just a precursor to the larger-than-life figure he would become. And while his legacy would eventually stretch across continents, it all started with a boy in Macedonia who was taught to think like a philosopher and fight like a king. As the curtains closed on Philip Roman II life in 336 BCE, thanks to a sharp dagger and some sharper palace intrigue, Alexander found himself thrust into the limelight as the new king of Macedonia. Talk about a fast-tracked career path. Now, stepping into the shoes of a man like Philip was no small feat. The guy had left behind some pretty big sandals to fill, not to mention a kingdom that was more tangled than a soap opera plot. Philip's assassination was like an ancient whodunit. Was it the result of a personal vendetta, a political coup, or simply a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time? The popular theory is that it was orchestrated by Pausanias, Philip's bodyguard, whose motives were as murky as the Aegean Sea on a stormy day. Some whispers even suggested Alexander and his mother, Olympias, were pulling the strings from behind the curtain. Whether or not they were involved, they certainly didn't mind the outcome. With Philip out of the picture, the path was clear for Alexander to ascend the throne at the ripe old age of 20. Now, most 20-year-olds today are figuring out how to pay off student loans or deciding whether to swipe left or right. Alexander, on the other hand, was busy consolidating power and planning world domination. But before he could dream of Persia and beyond, he had to deal with some serious housekeeping. First, there was the matter of securing his position as king. In a world where family loyalty was as reliable as a sandcastle in a hurricane, this involved a fair bit of, shall we say, persuasion. Alexander quickly dealt with rivals, including potential claimants to the throne. He executed anyone who might pose a threat, turning family reunions into rather tense affairs. Once his grip on Macedonia was secure, Alexander turned his eyes to the sprawling Greek city-states. They saw Philip's death as an opportunity to wriggle out from under Macedonia's thumb. But Alexander wasn't about to let his father's hard-won empire unravel like a cheap toga. In a bold move, he marched to Thessaly, a key player in the Greek League, and decisively brought them back in line. His show of strength and charisma convinced other city-states to toe the line, proving that sometimes a good reputation is as persuasive as 1,000 soldiers. Meanwhile, the economic realities of ruling an empire were no small potatoes. Maintaining the Macedonian army alone was a financial black hole. Soldiers needed equipment, food, and of course, their pay, unless you wanted your army to defect to the highest bidder. The costs were staggering, with estimates suggesting that Alexander's campaigns required tens of thousands of drachmas daily. To put it in perspective, a single drachma was roughly a day's wages for a skilled worker. So, imagine burning through thousands of those daily, and you'll appreciate Alexander's need for a constant influx of resources. And speaking of resources, the Persian Empire was the jackpot Alexander needed. Rich in both wealth and territory, Persia was the ultimate prize. But conquering it was no walk in the park. Before embarking on his campaign, Alexander secured his northern borders, a strategic move to prevent any backdoor invasions. He then turned his attention to Persia, starting with the city of Sardis, the ancient equivalent of a cash cow, thanks to its vast treasury. But let's not gloss over the logistical nightmare of moving an entire army across continents. Communication in Alexander's time wasn't exactly instantaneous. There were no emails, no texts, just slow-moving messengers who traveled by foot or horse. It said that messages could take days, even weeks, to reach their destination. Imagine trying to coordinate a massive military campaign with that kind of delay. Miscommunications were inevitable, and sometimes the consequences were deadly. In one instance, a message mix-up led to Alexander's forces attacking their own allies. Oops. Despite these hurdles, Alexander's charisma and leadership held his army together. He cultivated a sense of shared destiny, convincing his men that they were part of something greater than themselves. It was this vision, combined with his tactical brilliance, that propelled Alexander forward like a well-oiled war machine. His troops were loyal, not just because of their pay or because they feared his wrath, but because they believed in him. And it's this belief that helped Alexander turn setbacks into stepping stones. Even as he expanded his empire, Alexander didn't lose sight of the bigger picture. He understood that ruling was as much about diplomacy as it was about warfare. He established cities, Alexandria being the most famous, and spread Greek culture, creating a blend of East and West that laid the groundwork for the Hellenistic world. This cultural exchange was a cornerstone of his legacy, showing that sometimes the pen really is mightier than the sword. Yet, for all his achievements, Alexander's story is also a cautionary tale about ambition. His empire stretched from Greece to Egypt and as far as India, but holding it together was like trying to keep sand from slipping through your fingers. The costs, both in drachmas and human lives, were immense. Thousands of soldiers died in battle, and countless more succumbed to disease and exhaustion. It was a testament to the harsh realities of ancient warfare, where the glory of conquest was often overshadowed by the grim toll it took. As Alexander's empire grew, so did his legend. He was hailed as a god-like figure, a conqueror of worlds. But beneath the veneer of divinity lay a man who was as human as the rest of us, driven by ambition, haunted by ghosts, and ultimately subject to the same forces that govern all of humanity. His ascent to power was as much about navigating the treacherous waters of politics and economics as it was about wielding a sword. In the end, Alexander's story is a reminder that while history often remembers the victors, it's the complexities and contradictions that make them truly fascinating. And so, as we leave Alexander standing on the precipice of his great conquest, poised to take on the world, let's remember that his journey was just beginning. The stage was set for the next chapter in his epic saga, a tale of triumphs and tragedies, of alliances and betrayals, and of a legacy that would echo through the ages. But that's a story for another day. For now, we leave Alexander at the height of his power, a king among men, ready to stake his claim on history. As Alexander stood on the cusp of his epic campaign, ready to etch his name across the annals of history, he faced a pivotal moment at the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE. Picture the scene. The young king, barely old enough to rent a chariot without paying extra insurance, against Darius Roman III of Persia, a ruler with enough gold to make King Midas blush. This showdown was less of a David vs. Goliath and more of a clash of the titans, with Alexander outnumbered but certainly not outclassed. The Battle of Issus wasn't just a military engagement, it was a masterclass in tactics. Alexander, with his knack for the dramatic, chose the narrow coastal plain of Issus to neutralize the Persian numerical advantage. His strategy was like a chess game where he turned every pawn into a queen. Alexander's phalanx formation, a wall of spears that said "keep out," in no uncertain terms, marched forward with the precision of a Swiss watch. Meanwhile, his cavalry, the original Fast and Furious, flanked the Persian army, delivering a sucker punch that would make any boxing coach proud. The numbers paint a vivid picture. Darius fielded an army estimated at 100,000 soldiers, while Alexander had around 40,000. Yet, it was Alexander who emerged victorious, forcing Darius to flee the battlefield, reportedly so fast he left his family behind. Talk about a hasty retreat. Darius made Usain Bolt look like he was jogging. The win at Issus was more than just a tactical victory. It was a psychological triumph that shook the Persian Empire to its core. It was the ancient equivalent of a mic drop, and Alexander was ready for his encore. But let's not get lost in the romantic glow of battle. Ancient warfare was brutal, and Issus was no exception. Casualty estimates are as murky as the Euphrates after a storm, but it's believed that tens of thousands died. The ground was littered with the bodies of those who learned the hard way that glory often comes at a steep price. The gritty reality was that soldiers fought in close quarters, where the air was thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and blood. For all the tales of heroism, war was a grim business where victory was often measured in corpses. With Issus firmly in his rearview mirror, Alexander set his sights on Egypt. Now, if you thought Alexander was just about slashing and conquering, think again. He had a softer side, or at least a pragmatic one. In Egypt, he played the role of liberator rather than conqueror, positioning himself as the savior from Persian rule. By 331 BCE, Alexander had founded Alexandria, the city destined to become a beacon of Hellenistic culture. Think of it as the world's first fusion restaurant, blending Greek and Egyptian flavors in a melting pot that would simmer for centuries. Alexandria was more than just a city. It was a statement. It symbolized the melding of cultures and the spread of Greek influence across the known world. The city would eventually house the legendary Library of Alexandria, a repository of knowledge that would make even today's largest data centers seem quaint. But let's not romanticize it too much. Alexandria was also a strategic port, a cash cow for trade, and a key military base. Alexander knew that economic power was as crucial as military might in securing his empire. Yet, for all his successes, Alexander's journey was a marathon, not a sprint, and his army was feeling the burn. Imagine dragging your feet across thousands of miles, with weather conditions ranging from scorching deserts to freezing mountain passes. The Macedonian army, as much a family as a fighting force, was starting to feel like they'd signed up for the ancient world's longest Tough Mudder. It's a wonder they didn't demand frequent flyer miles, or at least a decent pair of sandals. Alexander's charisma was the glue holding his army together, but even that had its limits. The soldiers were loyal, sure, but loyalty had a shelf life, especially when faced with endless marching and constant battles. The strain was palpable, and whispers of dissent were beginning to ripple through the ranks. Alexander's challenge was to keep his men motivated, a task he managed with a mix of rewards, speeches, and the occasional "we're all in this together" camaraderie. It was like the world's toughest team-building exercise, with the stakes as high as Mount Olympus. And speaking of stakes, let's debunk one of the biggest myths surrounding Alexander, his supposed invincibility. While his record was impressive, he wasn't immune to setbacks. There were sieges that dragged on longer than expected, and battles where victory was snatched from the jaws of defeat by the narrowest of margins. His tactical brilliance was undeniable, but it was often his adaptability and sheer force of will that turned the tide. Alexander was a master of improvisation, a quality as vital as any sword or shield. The reality of ancient warfare was that it was as unpredictable as a soap opera plot twist. Supplies could run out, allies could turn into foes, and disease could decimate an army faster than enemy arrows. Alexander's campaigns were fraught with these challenges, yet he pressed on, driven by an ambition that was both his greatest strength and his Achilles' heel. His drive to conquer and unite the known world was a double-edged sword, promising glory on one side and ruin on the other. As we leave Alexander at this juncture, poised to continue his conquests into the heart of Persia, it's clear that his story is far from over. His journey was not just a series of battles, but a saga of human ambition, frailty, and resilience. While myths will always paint him as a near-mythical figure, the truth is that Alexander was a man of his time, a product of his upbringing, his environment, and his unyielding desire to leave a mark on history. His legend continues to captivate, not because he was invincible, but because he was human, with all the contradictions that entails. As we look forward to the next chapter, one can't help but wonder, how much further could he push the boundaries of his world before they pushed back? But that, my friends, is a tale for another day. And so, as we consider Alexander's relentless march into the Persian heartland, let's pivot to the cultural cocktail he was about to shake up. If you've ever tried to blend oil and water, you'll have some sense of what Alexander attempted with his policy of fusion. Imagine taking Greek culture, think philosophy, drama, and the occasional toga party, and mixing it with the vast array of customs and traditions of the East. It was an ambitious project, to say the least, like trying to knit a tapestry from threads scattered across a continent. Alexander's vision wasn't just about painting the world in Greek colors. It was about creating a new shade of civilization. This was the dawn of the Hellenistic era, a time when Greek culture spread like wildfire across the lands of the former Persian Empire. You could say Alexander was the original cultural influencer, swapping Instagram for inscriptions on stone tablets. The cities he founded were like ancient startup hubs, buzzing with ideas and trade, where Greek and Eastern influences mingled over the proverbial water cooler. Take Alexandria in Egypt, for instance. This wasn't just a city, it was a statement of intent. Here, Greek and Egyptian cultures coexisted, creating a melting pot that simmered with innovation. The Library of Alexandria, with its vast collection of scrolls, was like the internet of the ancient world, minus the cat videos. Scholars from all corners of the known world gathered here, sharing knowledge and ideas as freely as they shared a bottle of wine. It was a place where Euclid could ponder geometry, while Egyptian astronomers mapped the stars, all under the watchful gaze of the gods of both pantheons. But this cultural fusion wasn't always smooth sailing. Sometimes it was more like a drunken chorus at a wedding, enthusiastic yet occasionally off-key. For instance, Alexander's policy of encouraging marriages between his soldiers and local women was revolutionary, a bit like hosting a royal wedding every other week. Some saw it as a stroke of genius, a way to unite diverse peoples under a common banner. Others, less romantically inclined, viewed it as a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to register all those marriages in a time when the postal service was as reliable as a coin flip. These unions were supposed to blend cultures and create a new ruling class loyal to Alexander. But not everyone was keen on this matrimonial diplomacy. Macedonian soldiers often grumbled about having to swap their traditional homelands for foreign lands, and local populations sometimes saw these newcomers as little more than invaders with fancy titles. The resulting cultural exchanges were a mixed bag, with misunderstandings as common as olive oil at a Greek feast. Yet, despite the occasional hiccup, Alexander's policy of fusion had lasting impacts. It paved the way for the spread of Greek language, art, and ideas across a vast territory. In the bustling marketplaces of cities from Babylon to Bactria, you could hear traders haggling in Greek, Persian, and a mishmash of local dialects. Greek became the lingua franca, the common tongue that enabled merchants and philosophers alike to communicate across cultures. It was a bit like English today, except with more toga parties and fewer reality TV shows. But as Alexander was busy crafting his cultural legacy, his personal life was unraveling like a poorly tied sandal. You see, power and success can do funny things to a person's ego, and Alexander was no exception. By the time he reached the eastern edges of his empire, he was starting to believe his own press. His charisma was undeniable, but it was often cloaked in a growing sense of invincibility that bordered on hubris. Tales of his divine parentage, whispered since his youth, began to take on new significance in his mind. Was he truly the son of Zeus, as some flatterers claimed, or just a man standing on the shoulders of his father's ambition? Alexander's later years were marked by eccentricities that would make even the most flamboyant rock star blush. He adopted Persian customs, including the rather controversial practice of proskyneses, where subjects would prostrate themselves before him. His Macedonian compatriots, raised to see themselves as equals to their king, balked at this foreign ritual. It was as if Alexander had asked them to start speaking in riddles. It just didn't compute. Yet there was a method to his madness. Alexander's adoption of Persian customs was partly strategic, a way to win over his new subjects by showing respect for their traditions. But to his Macedonian generals, it felt like a betrayal, a sign that their king was drifting away from his roots. The tension was palpable, and Alexander's court became a hotbed of intrigue and speculation, with whispered plots and conspiracies swirling like autumn leaves in a storm. This growing divide between Alexander and his men came to a head during one of his infamous drinking parties. Imagine a scene worthy of the wildest college frat house, but with more togas and fewer red solo cups. During a heated argument, Alexander killed Cletus the Black, one of his trusted officers who had once saved his life in battle. It was a tragedy that sent shockwaves through the ranks, a reminder that even the greatest of leaders could be undone by their own demons. Yet, for all his faults, Alexander's vision of a united empire was revolutionary. He saw beyond the horizon, dreaming of a world where different cultures could coexist and learn from one another. His campaigns, while brutal and costly, laid the groundwork for a new era of cultural exchange and interaction. The Hellenistic world that emerged from his conquests was a tapestry woven from the threads of countless civilizations, each adding its own unique color and texture. But as with any tapestry, there were loose threads. Alexander's empire, vast and diverse, was held together by the force of his personality and his vision. With his death in 323 BCE, the unity he had forged began to unravel. His generals, the Diadochi, carved up the empire like a pie at a family dinner, each taking a slice for themselves. The dream of a united empire faded, replaced by the harsh realities of political ambition and the relentless march of time. And so, as we leave Alexander on the cusp of his final years, it's clear that his legacy is as complex and multifaceted as the man himself. He was a conqueror and a visionary, a unifier and a divisive figure, a hero and a cautionary tale. His story, like the myths that surround him, is a blend of fact and fiction, of romance and reality. But one thing is certain. Alexander the Great, in all his glory and folly, left a mark on history that echoes through the ages. And as we ponder the next chapter of his saga, we can't help but wonder how his story will continue to unfold. Stay tuned, my friends, for the tale is far from over. And as we ponder the next chapter of his saga, we can't help but wonder how his story will continue to unfold. Stay tuned, my friends, for the tale is far from over. Alexander the Great, a name that conjures images of invincibility, met an untimely and somewhat mysterious end in 323 BCE, leaving the grand tapestry of his empire to unravel faster than a cat chasing a ball of yarn. At just 32 years old, the conqueror who had never lost a battle succumbed not to the sword, but to fever after a 12-day illness in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, Roman II in Babylon. Theories abound about the cause of his death: malaria, typhoid fever, or even poisoning. But like a good detective novel, the truth remains elusive. What's certain is that his sudden departure left a power, vacuum the size of the Aegean Sea. Alexander's death was the ancient world's equivalent of pulling the plug on a giant humming machine. His empire, stretching from the dusty plains of Egypt to the fertile valleys of India, was held together by his sheer force of will. Without him, the whole thing was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Cue the Diadochi, his band of merry generals, who saw the empire as their personal piñata, a prize to be smashed open and divvied up, lacking a clear succession plan, unless you count the cryptic to the strongest as a masterstroke of estate planning. Alexander left his generals and family to squabble like seagulls over a breadcrumb. His sole heir, Alexander Roman IV, was just a toddler, and in the cutthroat world of ancient politics, a child ruler was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. So, the generals, including the likes of Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Antigonus, embarked on a decades-long game of risk, complete with alliances, betrayals, and enough intrigue to fill a Shakespearean tragedy. The empire fractured into several Hellenistic kingdoms, each ruled by one of Alexander's former generals. Ptolemy took Egypt and established a dynasty that lasted nearly 300 years, until Cleopatra and her infamous dalliance with Rome. Seleucus ended up with the lion's share of the territories, stretching from Asia Minor to India, creating the Seleucid Empire. Meanwhile, Antigonus tried to hold on to Greece and Macedonia, but found himself in a perpetual game of whack-a-mole as rival generals challenged his claim. It was a classic case of divide and conquer, except this time they were dividing themselves. While the generals played their real-life game of thrones, the legacy of Alexander began to take on a life of its own. He was lionized as a military genius, a cultural ambassador, and in some circles, a demigod. Stories of his exploits spread faster than gossip in a Roman bathhouse, painting him as a larger-than-life figure whose mere presence could inspire armies and terrify foes. Yet, like any good legend, the truth was more nuanced. Alexander was undoubtedly brilliant, but he was also ruthless, often leaving a trail of destruction in his wake that would make even the most hardened generals wince. Economically, his empire was both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, Alexander's conquests opened up trade routes that brought wealth and prosperity to many regions. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt flourished, becoming bustling centers of commerce and culture. On the other hand, maintaining such a vast empire was an economic sinkhole. The costs of war and the need to garrison troops across thousands of miles drained resources faster than a leaky amphora. The financial strain, combined with political infighting, made sustaining the empire's cohesion a Herculean task, pun intended. In terms of cultural impact, Alexander's legacy is as much about what he started as what he left behind. His campaigns spread Greek culture far and wide, leading to the Hellenistic Age, a period marked by a rich fusion of Eastern and Western traditions. This era saw advances in science, philosophy, and the arts, with cities like Alexandria and Antioch becoming melting pots of innovation and knowledge. Greek became the lingua franca, enabling scholars from different backgrounds to communicate and collaborate. It was a time when the seeds of modern science and philosophy were sown, with figures like Euclid, Archimedes, and Epicurus building on the foundation Alexander had laid. Yet, for all the grandeur and glory, the reality of Alexander's legacy is a mixed bag. His empire, once a beacon of unity, quickly devolved into a patchwork of warring states. The wars of the Diadochi left regions devastated and populations displaced. The cultural exchanges he fostered came at the cost of countless lives lost in battle and the subjugation of diverse peoples under Greek rule. It's a reminder that even the greatest of empires can crumble under the weight of their own ambition. In popular culture, Alexander remains a towering figure, a symbol of conquest and charisma. His story has been retold countless times, from ancient texts to Hollywood blockbusters, each adding their own layer of myth and mystique. He's been cast as a hero, a tyrant, a visionary, and a madman, depending on who's holding the pen. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of his legacy is the way it captures the imagination, a testament to the timeless allure of a man who dared to dream of uniting the known world. So, as we wrap up our journey through the life and legacy of Alexander the Great, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the complexities and contradictions that make his story so compelling. He was a product of his time, a man driven by ambition and shaped by the culture that nurtured him. His legacy is a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, woven from the threads of history and myth. And while the world he conquered has long since faded into the annals of history, the echoes of his exploits continue to resonate, a reminder of the indelible mark one man can leave on the world. Cheers to Alexander, a king among men, whose story, like the stars he once gazed upon, will shine brightly for generations to come. In the grand game of medieval power plays, nothing screamed, "Check out my status," quite like a 14th century banquet. Forget Facebook posts or Instagram likes. Back then, the ultimate social flex was inviting everyone who mattered to an evening of excessive eating, drinking, and a bit of good old-fashioned showing off. The medieval banquet was the Oscars of its time, minus the golden statues and awkward acceptance speeches, but with plenty of roasted peacock and enough wine to float a small village. So, what concoction of socio-political alchemy made these feasts possible? Let's start with the feudal system, the medieval version of Who's the Boss? Hint, it's not Tony Danza. The feudal system was a pyramid scheme that actually worked, though not exactly to the benefit of those at the bottom. At the top, you had the king, who theoretically owned all the land. Below him were the nobles, who were granted large parcels of this land in exchange for military service and loyalty. These nobles, the lords, were like the original landlords, and they had a knack for delegating. They parceled out land to vassals, who in turn managed peasants. Peasants, by the way, were the medieval version of employee of the month, but without the perks, unless you count survival as a perk. In essence, the feudal system was all about land and loyalty. The lords would throw these extravagant banquets as a way to cement alliances and showcase their wealth and power. Picture a scene where everyone important in the region gathered in a great hall, which, in today's terms, was like having a VIP section in a club, only with more wooden beams and fewer strobe lights. These banquets were not just meals. They were political theater, showing off the host's ability to gather resources, manage land, and command labor. But let's not sugarcoat things too much. The ability to throw such a feast was built on the backs of the peasants, who were the ones actually working the land. A lord's wealth came from his ability to extract resources from his landholdings, which meant squeezing the peasants for taxes, labor, and crops. The peasants plowed the fields, harvested the grain, and raised the livestock, all for the privilege of living on land they didn't own and eating food that was often more gruel than gourmet. But hey, at least they got to watch the festivities from a distance, if they were lucky. Now, the feudal system wasn't just about economics. It was also a web of mutual obligations. Lords needed the support of their vassals and knights to defend their territories, and banquets served as a platform to reaffirm these bonds. When a lord threw a banquet, it was about more than just flaunting his wealth with 5 courses and a spit-roasted boar. It was also a chance to remind everyone who was in charge and why they should continue to fight in his name. It was an exercise in diplomacy, a chance to forge alliances over a goblet of wine, lots of wine, because nothing says, "I trust you," like sharing a drink, or 10. Of course, behind the scenes of this culinary spectacle was a small army of cooks, servants, musicians, all working tirelessly to ensure the feast went off without a hitch. The medieval kitchen was a place of organized chaos. Cooks had to prepare dishes with rudimentary tools and open fires, all while keeping up with the whims of the lord and the availability of seasonal ingredients. Recipes were closely guarded secrets, often passed down through generations. Imagine trying to whip up a feast for hundreds without a single cookbook or even a reliable oven. Talk about flying by the seat of your chainmail. And let's not forget the entertainment. No medieval banquet was complete without it. Musicians, jesters, and even acrobats were brought in to keep the guests entertained between courses. This was the medieval version of Netflix, only live, and with a lot more juggling. The entertainment was not just for fun, though. It was also a way to distract and pacify guests, ensuring that no one got too rowdy or started plotting a coup over the mutton stew. The medieval banquet was a microcosm of the 14th century world, a stage where wealth, power, and politics played out in the form of a lavish meal. It was an event that highlighted the stark contrasts between the opulence of the nobility and the harsh realities of peasant life. While the lords dined on delicacies, the peasants toiled to make it all possible, their labor a silent underpinning of the evening's success. The banquets were indeed a spectacle, a testament to the social hierarchies and economic structures that defined the era. So, the next time you're enjoying a simple meal at home, just remember, at least you don't have to worry about impressing a room full of knights with your sous vide skills. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before the medieval lords could impress their guests with lavish spreads and courtly entertainment, there was the small matter of actually pulling it all together. Picture this. A medieval banquet was less a dinner party and more a logistical nightmare. Imagine if your boss decided to host Thanksgiving and invited everyone on LinkedIn. That's the scale we're talking about. First off, the sheer volume of ingredients required would send even the most seasoned chef into a cold sweat. The Lord Steward, a kind of medieval project manager, was the unsung hero of the day. This individual, often a trusted vassal or an experienced servant, was responsible for sourcing everything from the freshest game to the finest spices. And here's the kicker. Most of these ingredients weren't exactly local. Exotic spices like saffron and cinnamon had to be imported from the far-flung corners of the known world, making their way through bustling trade routes and countless middlemen before gracing the Lord's table. The cost of spices alone could rival a peasant's yearly earnings, which makes you wonder if the dishes were seasoned with a hint of bankruptcy. Back in the 14th century, logistics weren't managed by tapping on a smartphone. Instead, it was all about networks and negotiations. The steward had to haggle with merchants, rely on the goodwill of neighboring lords, and sometimes even engage in a bit of old-fashioned espionage to ensure that the banquet tables groaned under the weight of delicacies. But the real MVPs were the yeomen and huntsmen, the boots on the ground responsible for actually procuring the meats. These guys didn't just pop down to the medieval equivalent of Whole Foods. They had to venture into the forests, tracking and trapping game like deer, boars, and the occasional unfortunate peacock. It was hard work, but the feast wouldn't have been the same without their contributions. Once the ingredients were secured, the preparations kicked into high gear. The great hall of the castle was transformed, a process that required a small army of servants. Think of it as setting up for a rock concert, only with more trestle tables and fewer roadies. The hall had to be decorated with tapestries, banners, and the finest linens, all of which were meticulously arranged to reflect the lord's wealth and taste. The tables were set with pewter or silver plates, goblets, and utensils, each piece shining as if it had been personally polished by 1,000 diligent squirrels. In the kitchen, the head cook, or master chef if you will, marshaled his brigade like a general preparing for battle. This was the medieval command center, filled with the clatter of pots and the roar of fires. Cooking methods were rudimentary at best. Open flames, spits, and cauldrons were the order of the day. Yet, the cooks were expected to produce dishes that would not only satisfy, but also amaze. Imagine roasting a whole ox, or baking a pie the size of a small island, all without the luxury of modern kitchen gadgets. The recipes, passed down through generations, were closely guarded secrets, whispered only to the most trusted apprentices. And let's not forget the cellar, the guardian of the castle's most precious resource, the wine. While the kitchen staff ensured the food flowed, the cellarer's duty was to keep the guests' cups brimming. Wine wasn't just a drink, it was a social lubricant and a symbol of hospitality. A well-stocked wine cellar was as much a statement of power as the walls of the castle itself. Now, the cost of all this extravagance was nothing to sniff at. Hosting a banquet could drain a lord's coffers faster than you can say overdraft. We're talking about expenses that could compete with a small nation's GDP. The cost of the ingredients, the wages for the army of servants, the entertainment, everything had to be accounted for. It was a gamble, a financial high-wire act that, if successful, cemented the lord's status and influence. But if it went wrong, well, let's just say that creditors in the Middle Ages weren't known for their patience. The stakes were high, but for many, the chance to demonstrate power and build alliances was worth the risk. A successful banquet could open doors, secure allegiances, and even attract the attention of the king. After all, in a world where reputation was everything, what better way to show you were a force to be reckoned with than by hosting the medieval equivalent of a Super Bowl halftime show? But beneath the glitz and glamour, the harsh realities of medieval life were never far away. While the nobility reveled in their opulence, the common folk toiled tirelessly, their labor the true foundation of these grand events. The peasants who worked the fields, the servants who polished the silver, the cooks who braved the heat of the kitchen. They were the unsung heroes of the medieval banquet, their efforts supporting the weight of the Lord's ambitions. In the end, the medieval banquet was as much about power and politics as it was about food and festivity. A delicate dance of diplomacy served with a side of roast pheasant. And while the lords plotted alliances over goblets of wine, the echoes of their laughter masked the silent struggles of those who made it all possible. So next time you find yourself planning a big event, spare a thought for those medieval stewards and servants. It might just make your guest list look like a walk in the park. Now, as the servants scurried about like ants on a sugar rush, setting the grand hall for the evening's spectacle, the real drama was about to unfold. Picture a scene where the seating arrangement could make or break reputations faster than you can say Game of Thrones. In the medieval banquet, where you sat was almost as critical as what you ate, or who you were trying to impress. At the top of the pecking order, literally and figuratively, was the high table. This was the VIP section of the medieval world, where the lord and his most esteemed guests, often other nobles, clergy, and perhaps a visiting dignitary or two, were seated. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of the Oscars front row, minus the designer gowns and awkward camera angles. The high table was usually set on a raised platform, offering an unobstructed view of the proceedings, and more importantly, a clear sightline for everyone else to see them in their finery. Here, the power dynamics of the day were laid bare. The closer you sat to the lord, the more influence you wielded, and the more you were likely to benefit from the evening's political machinations. Meanwhile, the rest of the guests were seated according to their social ranking, with knights, landowners, and other minor nobles filling out the main body of the hall. Farther back sat the lesser vassals, and occasionally, if the lord was feeling particularly generous or strategic, a few well-respected townsfolk. And let's not forget the poor servants who, after a day of back-breaking work, would finally grab a bite in the kitchens or some hidden corner, far from the prying eyes of the nobility. Now, onto the banquet itself, an event that could easily stretch out for hours, sometimes even days if the host really wanted to flex his medieval muscles. The meal was less a structured dining experience and more an ongoing parade of culinary delights, each course a chance to showcase the host's wealth, and let's be honest, his ability to procure ingredients from the far corners of the known world. The courses were served in a specific order, starting with lighter fare and progressing to the heavier, more elaborate dishes. First came the potages and soups, comforting and warming, a gentle start to the marathon ahead. Next up were the fish dishes, a nod to the church's dietary laws which prohibited meat on certain days. But don't let that fool you into thinking this was a humble affair. We're talking about elaborate preparations featuring freshwater and saltwater species, all seasoned to perfection. Following the fish came the meat courses, the true stars of the evening. There was no such thing as too much meat, and variety was the name of the game. Roasted venison, boar, beef, and, for the truly ostentatious, whole peacocks. Yes, you heard that right. Peacock, with feathers and all, because presentation was everything. And speaking of presentation, it's time to address one of the most persistent myths about medieval dining, table manners. We've all heard the tales of knights gnawing on drumsticks and tossing bones over their shoulders, but the truth might surprise you. While it's true that forks hadn't yet become a staple at the medieval table, they were considered a bit too fancy for everyday use. Spoons and knives were common, and despite the absence of formalized etiquette guides, there were still plenty of unwritten rules. For example, it was considered polite to bring your own knife, a gesture that showed you were ready for anything the banquet might throw at you, literally and figuratively. Napkins were also a thing, though they often took the form of shared towels, which might make today's germaphobes shudder. As for the courses, they just kept coming. After the meats, it was time for the subtleties, elaborate dishes designed more for show than sustenance. These were feats of culinary artistry, often shaped into fantastical creatures or scenes, sometimes even animated with clever use of internal mechanisms. Imagine a pastry castle with a drawbridge that actually moves. It was the medieval equivalent of molecular gastronomy, a total delight for the eyes and a testament to the chef's skill. And let's not forget the spices, the real stars of the medieval pantry. If you think the modern obsession with turmeric and saffron is intense, it's nothing compared to the medieval spice craze. Spices were the bling of the banquet, a sign of wealth and status. With cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg flowing from the east, and pepper gracing every dish that could hold it. It was less about the flavor, and more about flaunting your ability to afford these exotic imports. Some might say they seasoned their dishes with a hint of economic hubris. Of course, what's a feast without a little sweet ending? The dessert course was a confectionery triumph, featuring candied fruits, marzipan creations, and spiced wine, a nod to the host's opulence and the evening's success. And through it all, the wine flowed like water, lubricating the social gears, and ensuring that alliances were forged, disputes settled, and occasionally a few inhibitions were loosened. It was a medieval social gambit, where after several goblets, even the most stoic knight might find himself waxing poetic, or challenging a rival to a duel over a perceived slight. Yet, beneath the grandeur and the gaiety, the medieval banquet was a mirror reflecting the stark realities of the time. It was a theater of power plays and social hierarchies, a stage where every dish served was a reminder of the lord's influence and the peasant's toil. While the nobility may have been the stars of the show, it was the unseen efforts of countless workers that truly made the spectacle possible. The feast was as much about the power dynamics of the day as it was about the extravagant courses, an intricate dance of diplomacy and excess, served with a side of roast peacock. But don't put away your medieval dance card just yet. The night was far from over. Entertainment was key, and the lords of the manor knew that a well-fed guest was a happy guest, but a well-entertained guest was one who might just pledge his loyalty. As the last course was cleared, the hall transformed once more, this time into a stage for minstrels, jesters, and troubadours, the medieval Netflix lineup ready to stream live. The jesters, in particular, held a unique place in the medieval social fabric. Their antics, while seemingly frivolous, often carried sharp political commentary, thinly veiled in humor. A risky business, but one sanctioned by tradition. They could mock the high and mighty, as long as it was all in good jest, of course, and their presence at a banquet was as much about entertainment as it was about subtle reminders of the power structures at play. And so, as laughter echoed through the great hall and the music played on, a new day began to dawn on the medieval world. As the guests finally took their leave, bellies full and heads spinning with wine and intrigue, the servants began the long process of clearing the remnants of the night's excess. The high table, now empty, stood as a silent testament to the evening's political theater, the banquet a tapestry of alliances, ambitions, and the ceaseless churn of history. So next time you find yourself at a dinner party, remember the medieval banquet, a grand affair where every seat mattered, every course was a statement, and every toast was a promise wrapped in a goblet of wine. And if you happen to spot a peacock on the menu, well, you know you're in for an evening of medieval proportions. Stay tuned, because the story of the medieval banquet isn't over yet. There's still intrigue to uncover and culinary curiosities to explore as we dive deeper into the world of 14th century feasting. And as the medieval dusk gave way to the glow of candlelit revelry, the great hall became a medieval variety show where the stars of the evening weren't just the roasted boars or the subtlety pastries, but the entertainers who brought the banquet to life. Enter the jesters and minstrels, the original court jesters and rock, stars without the groupies or electric guitars. These performers were the social media influencers of the 14th century, except they didn't just tweet. They sang, joked, and occasionally juggled flaming torches. Jesters were the masters of satire and slapstick, their jibes and jests a savvy mix of buffoonery and biting commentary. They were the stand-up comedians of their time, except instead of a brick wall at a comedy club, their backdrop was the opulent tapestry of a lord's great hall. And while jesters often wore the fool's martley, they were anything but foolish. These entertainers navigated the treacherous waters of court politics with a quick wit and a sharp tongue, managing to entertain without crossing the line into treason, a delicate balance that could turn a laugh into a death sentence if misjudged. Minstrels, on the other hand, were the troubadours of the medieval world, spinning tales of chivalry, love, and adventure. Their ballads and stories were the Netflix series of the day, binged over goblets of mead and the warm glow of a roaring fire. These traveling musicians brought news from afar and entertained the guests with tales of heroism. Think of them as the CNN correspondents of the Middle Ages, but with more loot, and less breaking news. Minstrels were often welcomed guests at banquets, their music a soothing backdrop to the political maneuvering that was as much part of the feast as the lavish courses. Now, let's talk about the real reason these entertainers were so critical to the evening's success. The medieval banquet was less a passive dining experience and more of a networking event on steroids. In a time when the phrase networking event conjured up images of feasting tables rather than linked-in connections, the banquet was the ultimate arena for forging alliances, negotiating treaties, and occasionally hatching the odd conspiracy. Over the clinking of goblets and the laughter at a jester's antics, whispers of political intrigue wove through the crowd like a well-placed rumor. Imagine the scene. A nobleman leans over to his counterpart, ostensibly discussing the latest court gossip, but really negotiating a marriage alliance that could bring him a swath of land and a tidy dowry to boot. Across the table, a knight might be securing a promise of military support in exchange for a favorable position in an upcoming campaign. It was diplomacy at its most festive, and let's face it, most chaotic. With the wine flowing and inhibitions lowered, secrets were shared, promises made, and sometimes vendettas born. And while it might sound like the stuff of legends, these banquets could indeed make or break a career faster than you can say medieval LinkedIn. A well-placed word in a lord's ear could secure a vassal's future, while an ill-timed joke might see a knight's prospects vanish faster than a tray of roast pheasant. The stakes were high, and everyone knew it. In a world where allegiances were as changeable as the weather and just as unpredictable, a successful evening could solidify a lord's power or send it crashing down like an overcooked soufflé. Of course, no tale of medieval banquets would be complete without addressing the elephant in the room, or rather, the peacock. For all the romantic notions we hold about these feasts, the reality was often a far cry from the idyllic scenes painted by troubadours. Beneath the glamour and the gild, the feasts were underpinned by a harsh economic reality. The cost of hosting such an event could rival that of a modern-day wedding, and the pressure to impress was immense. Lords wagered their fortunes on the success of the evening, the financial stakes as high as the social ones. Yet, for all its excess, the medieval banquet was a microcosm of the times, a reflection of a society built on hierarchy, power, and the ever-turning wheel of fortune. It was a stage where the drama of human ambition played out amid the clatter of plates and the strains of a minstrel's lute. In this world, the line between friend and foe was as thin as the edge of a knight's sword, and alliances could shift with the winds of fortune. But let's not get too caught up in the intrigue without acknowledging the true stars of the evening, the unsung heroes who made it all possible. While the lords and ladies toasted to their future successes, the servants toiled behind the scenes, their efforts the invisible thread that held the banquet together. From the kitchen staff, who braved the heat of the fires, to the stewards who orchestrated the evening with military precision, they were the backbone of the event, their labor a silent testament to the realities of medieval life. So, as the last notes of the minstrel's song faded into the night, and the guests began to retire to their chambers, the great hall returned to its silent grandeur, the echoes of the evening's revelry lingering in the air. The medieval banquet was over, but its legacy would linger on, an intricate tapestry of power, politics, and human ambition woven into the very fabric of history. And as we pack away the remnants of our medieval feast, let's leave a little room for dessert, shall we? Because in the grand banquet of history, there's always another course waiting in the wings, another story to tell over a goblet of mead and the flickering light of a candle. Stay tuned, because the tale of the medieval banquet is far from finished. There are still secrets to uncover and tales to tell as we dive deeper into the world of 14th century feasting. As the echoes of laughter and lute music faded, leaving behind the scent of roasted meats and the faint glow of candlelight, the real work of the medieval banquet began. While the lords and ladies retired to their chambers, perhaps dreaming of alliances forged and promises whispered, the unsung heroes of the evening got to work. Yes, I'm talking about the cleanup crew, a medieval task force that would make even the most seasoned wedding planner shudder. You might think the party's over, but for these diligent servants, it was just another night in the Middle Ages. Imagine the scene. Servants scurrying like caffeinated squirrels, collecting goblets and plates, sweeping up the remnants of a feast that could rival a small kingdom's GDP. All that opulence, it didn't just vanish into the ether. No, it lingered stubbornly in the form of half-eaten pies, spilled wine, and the occasional discarded peacock feather. This wasn't just tidying up. It was a full-scale operation that required military precision. The Great Hall, once a theater of wealth and power, now resembled the aftermath of a medieval rock concert. The task was immense. Consider this. A typical banquet might host hundreds of guests. Each guest could easily consume the equivalent of 2 or 3 meals over the course of an evening. That's a lot of trenchers, goblets, and utensils to scrub, especially when you're doing it by hand, without the aid of modern conveniences like dishwashers or rubber gloves. These servants were the unsung champions of the medieval world, turning chaos into order with nothing more than elbow grease and sheer determination. And let's not forget the economic ripple effect of these lavish affairs. Hosting a banquet wasn't just about impressing your peers. It was also a significant boon to the local economy. The preparation and aftermath of a single feast could employ dozens, if not hundreds, of workers. Farmers supplied the grain and livestock, merchants traded in spices and fineries, and artisans crafted the dinnerware and decorations. It was a medieval stimulus package, an economic engine fueled by the whims and wallets of the nobility. Take spices, for example. In the 14th century, a pound of saffron could cost the equivalent of a laborer's annual wages. Imagine that, a single evening's seasoning worth months of hard labor. And yet, the demand was insatiable. The aristocracy's appetite for the exotic was a driving force behind trade routes that spanned continents, from the spice markets of the East to the bustling ports of the Mediterranean. The banquet table, in all its splendor, was a testament to this global economy, a reminder that even in the Middle Ages, the world was more interconnected than we might assume. But here's the kicker. While the nobility reveled in their finery, the economic benefits of these feasts were often a double-edged sword. Sure, local economies could thrive on the demand generated by a lord's extravagance, but for many, the reality was a cycle of feast and famine. The peasants who tilled the land, the workers who crafted the goods, they rarely saw a substantial share of the wealth they helped create. It was a stark reminder of the disparities that defined medieval life, where one night's revelry could mean months of toil for others. And yet, despite, or perhaps because of, these inequities, the allure of the medieval banquet endures. It's tempting to romanticize these feasts, to envision a world of chivalry and opulence, where knights and ladies danced beneath candlelit chandeliers, oblivious to the harsh realities beyond the castle walls. But let's not be fooled by the glittering facade. Beneath the surface, these banquets were a reflection of a society built on hierarchy and power, where the gap between rich and poor was as wide as the moat surrounding a lord's castle. By the time the last goblet was polished and the last candle extinguished, the servants would have been bone-tired, ready to collapse into the straw mattresses that awaited them. Yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a certain pride in their work, a silent acknowledgement that, for one night at least, they had been part of something grand, even if they were mere shadows in the tapestry of history. They were the invisible hands that turned the wheels of power, the unsung architects of an evening that will be remembered in tales and songs for years to come. So, as we draw the curtains on this medieval spectacle, let's take a moment to reflect on the legacy of these grand feasts. They were more than just meals. They were microcosms of a world defined by its contrasts, where opulence and poverty coexisted in uneasy harmony, where power was both flaunted and solidified over a goblet of wine. The medieval banquet was a stage where history played out in courses, each dish a reminder of the social and economic fabric that held the world together. In the end, the story of the medieval banquet is a tale of human ambition and the relentless pursuit of status, a dance of diplomacy and excess played out beneath the flickering light of 1,000 candles. It's a reminder that, while the world may change, some things remain constant. The desire to impress, to connect, and to carve out a place in the ever-turning wheel of history. So next time you find yourself at a dinner party, spare a thought for those medieval revelers and the unseen hands that made their feasts possible. Because beneath the glamour and the gild, the true story of the medieval banquet is one of human endeavor, as complex and multifaceted as the age itself. And with that, we bid farewell to our medieval feast, leaving behind the echoes of laughter and the faint scent of spice. As we step back into the present, a world where the lessons of the past still resonate, reminding us of the power of a shared meal and the stories it can tell. In a universe where Amazon Prime delivers your cat food the same day, the Phoenicians were the OG purveyors of fast shipping, minus the drones and tracking apps. These ancient mariners, often called the Purple People, thanks to their penchant for Tyrian purple dye, made from the goo of sea snails, mind you, were the nautical ninjas of the Mediterranean. They didn't just set sail, they established a maritime empire long before it was cool to do so. Back in the day, around 1200 BCE, the Phoenicians emerged as a cluster of city-states scattered along the coast of what is now Lebanon. This wasn't some grand, unified kingdom with a single ruler sitting on a throne made of gold-plated fish bones. Nope, these were independent cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, each with its own flair, but sharing a common love for the ocean and commerce. You see, geography was their wingman. Nestled between the sea and the mountains, they had no choice but to look seaward for their fortunes. The rugged terrain behind them was no friend to agriculture, so they had to get creative with their economy. Now, let's pause to consider their legendary seamanship. The romantic notion is that they were the Poseidons of their day, taming the wild seas with nothing but a nod and a wink. In reality, their mastery came from necessity and a healthy dose of innovation. They crafted sturdy ships, some even with multiple decks, and the ability to sail vast distances. The Phoenician bireme, a type of galley, was the sports car of the ancient world, built for speed and agility. It wasn't just about looking good on the water. It was about surviving treacherous journeys and returning with cargo holds brimming with exotic goods. The Mediterranean was their playground, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. Pirates, storms, and rival traders were constant threats. Yet, the Phoenicians didn't become the maritime moguls of their time by being timid. They were the first to establish trade routes that spanned from the coasts of North Africa to the Iberian Peninsula and beyond. They swapped everything from glassware to cedarwood, which the Egyptians adored for their shipbuilding. Let's not forget the aforementioned Tyrian purple, a color so exclusive it was practically the Instagram blue checkmark of the ancient world. Or were they really the master seafarers they're cracked up to be? The truth is a tad less glamorous. While they were excellent navigators, they also relied heavily on hugging coastlines and stopping frequently to trade and restock. Open ocean voyages were rare and fraught with peril. They were practical, not reckless adventurers. The Phoenicians knew the value of their cargo and preferred to keep their ships in one piece rather than chase some mythical sea monster in uncharted waters. Their trading prowess wasn't just about goods, it was also about ideas. They spread the alphabet. Yes, the very foundation of written communication as they traveled, influencing cultures and civilizations far and wide. This was the Phoenicians' real legacy, connecting disparate cultures through trade and language. It's a bit like how we pass memes around the internet today, only with fewer cat videos and more clay tablets. So, while the legend paints them as fearless explorers with a penchant for the exotic, the reality was they were savvy entrepreneurs who knew how to capitalize on their geographical constraints and turn them into opportunities. They were the Amazon Prime of their time, with a customer service department that could probably teach modern companies a thing or two about reliability. And as we set the stage for their story, keep in mind that the Phoenician success wasn't just about the sea. It was about understanding the world around them and using it to their advantage. As we dive deeper into the world of Phoenician trade, let's be clear. These folks didn't just dabble in commerce. They were the Elon Musk of the ancient world, minus the tweets. Their trade routes were the arteries of the Mediterranean, pumping life and a whole lot of money into every port they touched. Their trade network was the ancient version of a global supply chain, and it was as sophisticated as it was sprawling. First, let's talk routes. The Phoenicians were masters of the maritime highway, with a web of sea lanes that reached from the Levant to the far-flung shores of what is now Spain and Morocco. Picture this, a bustling Phoenician port in Tyre around 900 BCE, with ships setting sail towards Cyprus, Egypt, and as far west as the Strait of Gibraltar. These routes weren't just lines on a map, they were lifelines. And, unlike today's satellite-guided vessels, Phoenician ships relied on stars, landmarks, and a hefty dose of sailors' intuition. The phrase smooth sailing didn't exist back then. Now, about those ships. The Phoenician bireme was the unsung hero of their trading prowess. Think of it as the Swiss Army knife of ships. Versatile, durable, and surprisingly swift. These vessels could carry about 100 tons of cargo, which translates to roughly 10,000 amphorae of goods. The Phoenicians knew that a ship's worth wasn't just in its ability to float, it was in its capacity to deliver goods safely and speedily. And oh, the goods they carried. We're talking about the Tyrian purple dye, which required around 250,000 sea snails just to produce a single ounce. Talk about high maintenance. This dye was so exclusive that wearing it was like strutting around in designer labels. Only the elite could afford it. Cedarwood was another hot commodity, the ancient equivalent of Scandinavian flat-pack furniture. When the Egyptians wanted to build a boat or a palace, they didn't head to the local lumber yard. They called the Phoenicians. This wood was prized for its resistance to rot and its lovely scent, which was probably a bonus in a world where deodorant wasn't a thing. The pharaohs were willing to pay a pretty penny for it, making Phoenician cedar a cornerstone of their economy. But let's not romanticize their trade as some kind of ancient Etsy shop. The economics of Phoenician trade were gritty and complex. They operated in a cutthroat environment where profit margins could sink or swim based on the winds and whims of the market. The cost of outfitting a single ship could run into the thousands of shekels, an investment akin to buying a fleet of Teslas today. And their profits, well, a well-run voyage could return several times the initial investment, enough to keep Tyre and Sidon buzzing with wealth, and occasionally scandal. This economic engine wasn't just about individual gain. It was about city-states competing like rival hedge funds. Tyre and Sidon, those glittering jewels of Phoenician prosperity, were the Wall Streets of their time. They wielded influence not just through wealth, but through a sort of soft power. Because when you control the supply lines of luxury, you tend to have a say in political affairs too. They were the ultimate middlemen, and they knew it. Yet, amidst their success, the Phoenicians faced their share of myths. One persistent legend is that they were the first to circumnavigate Africa, a claim that's more wishful thinking than historical fact. While they were capable sailors, the idea of them rounding the Cape of Good Hope is more likely the result of some ancient PR campaign. What they did excel at was networking. Long before LinkedIn, the Phoenicians were building connections, spreading not just goods but culture and ideas. Their trading ventures were a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. They took the raw materials of the world, wood, dye, metals, and transformed them into objects of value and desire. In doing so, they turned their geographical limitations into an empire of influence that spanned continents. While the romantic vision paints them as fearless explorers, the reality is they were shrewd entrepreneurs who understood the power of trade to shape not just their fate, but the world's. And so, with their ancient maritime empire still echoing in modern commerce, the Phoenicians left a legacy as vivid as the Tyrian purple they once sold. Now, as we navigate the waters of ancient trade, let's make a pit stop at the bustling intersection of culture and commerce. The Phoenicians weren't just peddling cedar and purple dye. They were unwittingly orchestrating one of history's earliest instances of globalization. Picture the Mediterranean as a melting pot, with the Phoenicians playing the role of head chef, stirring in a dash of linguistic innovation and a pinch of cultural exchange. But hold your sailboats, folks. This wasn't all cumbear and shared wisdom over a crackling campfire. Sometimes it resembled a pirate movie, with less Johnny Depp and more actual danger. First up on the cultural menu, the Phoenician alphabet. This wasn't just any old string of letters. We're talking about the granddaddy of modern alphabets, a game-changer in the world of communication. Around the 11th century BCE, these crafty traders ditched cumbersome cuneiform for a sleek, 22-character alphabet. It was like swapping your Nokia brick for the latest iPhone, only with more papyrus and fewer emojis. This nifty invention spread like wildfire as Phoenician traders made port calls around the Mediterranean, from Ugarit to Carthage, and even as far as Greece. The Greeks took one look at this user-friendly script and thought, hey, this works. They tweaked it a bit, adding vowels, which, let's be honest, made the whole reading thing a whole lot easier. And voila, the alphabetic domino effect began, laying the groundwork for Latin, and eventually the scripts we use today. So next time you shoot off a text message, perhaps spare a thought for those ancient scribes who paved the way. But let's not get too carried away with the romantic vision of cultures intertwining like a serene dance on a moonlit beach. The Phoenician brand of cultural exchange sometimes came with a side of sharp cutlasses and ill-gotten gains. You see, being a master of the sea had its benefits, but also some rather shady implications. Tales of Phoenician piracy aren't just salty sea lore. They were a reality of trade during this era. When your livelihood depends on the unpredictable whims of the sea, sometimes you have to get a little creative. And by creative, I mean taking what isn't yours. With their nimble ships and intimate knowledge of maritime routes, the Phoenicians could easily switch from legitimate traders to opportunistic marauders. It's not like they had a Yelp page to worry about. This duality of trader and raider was a tightrope walk of epic proportions. On one hand, they were fostering connections and spreading ideas. On the other, they were occasionally helping themselves to whatever wasn't nailed down. The line between commerce and piracy was as blurred as a stormy horizon. But one thing was clear. The Phoenicians were adept at navigating both worlds. Their reputation was a complex tapestry, woven with threads of innovation and the occasional thread of treachery. Culturally, the Phoenicians were like the cool kids everyone wanted to hang with, and their influence can't be overstated. Their trade networks were conduits for more than just goods. They were channels for art, religion, and technology. For instance, the Phoenician goddess Astarte found her way into various pantheons, morphing into Aphrodite in Greece and Ishtar in Mesopotamia. It's like the ancient version of a cultural rebrand, with divine entities getting a makeover for new markets. Then there was the architectural know-how. The Phoenicians were the Frank Lloyd Wrights of the ancient world, bringing their construction techniques far and wide. Their skills in building with timber and stone set the foundation, literally and figuratively, for the cities they helped shape. The influence of their craftsmanship could be seen in the grandiose structures of Carthage, the most famous colony, which became a powerhouse in its own right, rivaling Rome, until things got, well, a bit heated. The unintended side effects of Phoenician trade were like the ripples from a pebble tossed into a pond, unpredictable, far-reaching, and sometimes a little chaotic. As they spread their wings or sails across the Mediterranean, they left an indelible mark on history, one that blended the lines between peaceful exchange and forceful acquisition. It's a testament to the complexities of human nature, how necessity drives innovation, and occasionally a bit of underhandedness. In the grand scheme of ancient history, the Phoenicians were both catalysts and chameleons, adapting and influencing wherever they went. Their legacy is one of contradiction and brilliance, a testament to the fact that history is rarely black and white. As we continue to explore their story, keep in mind that the Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were architects of a cultural mosaic, albeit with a few rough edges. Now, with their sails still fluttering on the horizon, we set course for the next chapter in this maritime saga, where the stakes get higher, the players more ambitious, and the seas even more treacherous. So, with the Phoenician sails still fluttering on the horizon, we set course for the next chapter in this maritime saga, where the stakes get higher, the players more ambitious, and the seas even more treacherous. You see, the Phoenicians weren't just trading tycoons with a penchant for purple dye. They were also master political tightrope walkers in a region where diplomacy often meant the difference between thriving and, well, being wiped off the map. Let's chat about their relationships with the big dogs of the ancient world, Egypt and Assyria. Picture the Mediterranean as a lavish banquet, with Egypt and Assyria as the guests of honor, and the Phoenicians as the ever-resourceful waitstaff, deftly dodging imperial appetites while serving up trade deals like hors d'oeuvres. The Phoenicians were aces at knowing when to shake hands and when to duck under the table. Take their dealings with Egypt, for instance. It was around 1075 BCE when the new kingdom of Egypt started to show signs of aging, like an empire-sized midlife crisis. The Phoenicians, always with their finger on the pulse, seized the opportunity not just to trade cedar wood, but to secure a political buffer. They were savvy enough to supply Egypt with the timber they desperately needed, ensuring that pharaohs could keep building their monumental ego boosters, pyramids, ships, you name it. This wasn't just about commerce. It was about crafting an insurance policy against Egyptian ambitions. By keeping the Nile rulers happy with regular shipments of cedar, they effectively bought themselves a measure of protection. allowing them to thrive without getting swallowed up by Egyptian expansionism. Now, let's pivot to Assyria, the ancient equivalent of that one neighbor who's always building an extension on their house, complete with a moat and drawbridge. The Assyrians weren't known for their subtlety, preferring the direct approach of battering rams and sieges. Yet the Phoenicians managed to keep the peace, or at least a reasonable facsimile of it. They paid tribute, which might sound like a fancy word for protection money, and in many ways it was. It was the price for keeping Assyrian armies at bay, a sort of please don't hurt us tax. But the Phoenicians turned this tribute into an investment. By contributing goods and money, they bought themselves time and freedom to expand their trade networks without an Assyrian boot on their neck. We have records from the annals of Assyrian kings, like Tiglath-Pileser Roman III, who was all too happy to boast about how these maritime merchants came bearing gifts. It was a delicate dance, one that required a level of diplomatic finesse that would make modern politicians envious. The Phoenicians were the ultimate pragmatists, understanding that sometimes you had to pay to play, and more importantly, to stay in the game. But let's not sugarcoat this with some grand symphony of diplomacy. The Phoenicians weren't just playing nice to be nice. They were playing the longest game of avoid getting conquered in history, and they were good at it. Their strategy was less about being the diplomatic geniuses history sometimes paints them as, and more about being the ultimate realists. They knew their strengths: trade, navigation, cultural influence, and they leveraged them to remain relevant and independent in a world where the word empire was often synonymous with trouble. Their political maneuvering wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving in a geopolitical landscape where alliances were as fickle as the Mediterranean weather. By maintaining a low profile, they kept their cities vibrant and economically robust. Their city-states were like the Switzerland of the ancient world, neutral, prosperous, and oddly untouched by the chaos around them. This ability to fly under the radar while simultaneously weaving a web of influence is part of what makes the Phoenician story so compelling. They didn't seek to conquer, they sought to connect. Their empire wasn't built on the backs of subjugated peoples, but on the strength of trade agreements and mutual benefits. They were the ancient world's ultimate middlemen, and they knew that to keep their ships sailing and their ports bustling, sometimes the best move was to simply keep a low profile. Yet, for all their cleverness, the Phoenicians weren't immune to the harsh realities of politics. Their city-states often had to navigate internal rivalries and external pressures, with Tyre and Sidon sometimes squabbling like siblings over a favorite toy. The balance of power within Phoenicia itself was a delicate one, akin to a tightrope walker juggling flaming torches over a pit of vipers. But somehow, they managed to keep their balance, expertly playing empires off one another while keeping their own interests at the forefront. In this dance of diplomacy, the Phoenicians showed that sometimes the greatest power is that of subtlety. They understood that, while empires might rise and fall, trade and the flow of goods and ideas were constants. By aligning themselves as indispensable allies, without becoming subservient, they etched out a niche where they could flourish, a testament to their mastery of the art of staying out of the spotlight. As we sail through the complexities of Phoenician politics, remember this: their story isn't just one of trade and economy. It's a saga of strategic brilliance, where the true currency was influence, and the real power was in knowing when to make a move, and when to let others think they were calling the shots. So, as the sun sets on this chapter of Phoenician history, we leave their tale open-ended, much like their own legacy, a vibrant, interconnected tapestry, still rippling across the waters of time. As the Phoenicians continued their delicate dance of diplomacy, the sands of time were quietly slipping away beneath their nimble feet. The world was changing, and not in the Phoenicians' favor. By the time the Greeks and Romans came strutting onto the Mediterranean stage, flexing their imperial muscles, our seafaring friends were starting to look a bit like the forgotten band at a rock concert, where the headliners had finally arrived. The Greeks, with their penchant for philosophy and naval warfare, and the Romans, with their insatiable appetite for conquest and infrastructure, were not the kind of neighbors who borrowed a cup of sugar and left it at that. The decline of the Phoenician trade networks wasn't sudden, like a ship striking a reef, but more of a gradual sinking, like a ship with a slow leak. The rise of Greek city-states, particularly the maritime prowess of Athens, and the militaristic might of Sparta began to overshadow the once dominant Phoenician fleets. The Greeks didn't just bring their A-game in trade, they brought competition that was as fierce as their hoplites. By the 5th century BCE, Greek colonies had sprung up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, spreading across the Mediterranean and beyond, challenging Phoenician dominance with a new vigor. Meanwhile, Rome was still in its early stages of empire building, but the seeds of its eventual dominance were already germinating. By the time the Romans started eyeing the western Mediterranean, where the Phoenician colony of Carthage had become the jewel in their colonial crown, the writing was on the wall. The Punic Wars, 3 brutal conflicts fought between 264 and 146 BCE, were less about trade routes and more about survival. Carthage, once a bustling hub of Phoenician commerce and culture, found itself locked in a do-or-die struggle with Rome, and we all know how that turned out. Spoiler alert, Carthage got the short end of the trireme. Yet, even as the Phoenicians faded from the geopolitical spotlight, their legacy was far from extinguished. Their innovations in trade and communication were like seeds that had taken root across the Mediterranean, sprouting in ways they could never have imagined. The alphabet they developed, which had once been a simple tool for scribbling trade agreements and love letters, became the backbone of communication for the Greeks, and later the Romans, and ultimately us. Without it, we might still be scratching our heads over pictographs or squinting at cuneiform tablets. Their maritime routes, painstakingly charted and navigated by generations of Phoenician sailors, laid the groundwork for future trade empires. The Greeks and Romans took the baton and ran with it, expanding these routes into a complex network that would eventually connect with the Silk Road, creating a trade superhighway that spanned continents. The Phoenicians, with their knack for networking and their ability to turn a profit from even the most humble of cargoes, had set the stage for a truly global economy. They were the original globalization pioneers, long before the term became a buzzword at economics conferences. And let's not forget their cultural contributions, which were as vibrant as the Tyrian purple they so famously produced. The Phoenician knack for cultural diffusion meant that their gods, art, and architecture had seeped into the very foundations of the civilizations that followed. Their goddess Astarte might have gotten a makeover as Aphrodite, but her roots were undeniably Phoenician. Their architectural techniques, particularly their use of timber and stone, continued to influence construction long after their city-states had faded into obscurity. The ruins of Carthage, despite being razed by the Romans, continued to bear testament to the architectural ingenuity of its Phoenician founders. So, did the Phoenician influence truly fade? Not quite. It transformed, evolved, and integrated into the very fabric of the ancient world, much like a drop of dye spreading through water. Their story is a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring power of ideas. In a world where empires rose and fell with alarming regularity, the Phoenicians understood that the true legacy lay not in the fleeting glories of conquest, but in the lasting impact of trade and cultural exchange. They were the ultimate pragmatists, the realists who knew that while ships might sink and cities might fall, ideas and the alphabets that convey them could endure. Their innovations echoed through history, influencing the development of modern trade, communication, and culture, leaving a legacy as rich and complex as they were. In a world where globalization and cultural exchange are buzzwords of the day, the Phoenicians remind us that these concepts are as old as civilization itself. They were the original networkers, the pioneers of a trade system that connected disparate cultures long before the term global village was coined. Their story, with all its twists and turns, remains a vibrant testament to the power of connection, innovation, and resilience. So, as we close the book on their maritime saga, let's give a nod to the Phoenicians, a people who, in their own quiet way, changed the course of history, leaving a legacy that still ripples across the seas of time. The buzz of ancient Babylon greets you before your eyes even open. It's the kind of morning where the air carries the scent of both possibility and a bit of livestock. Merchants are already setting up their stalls, hollering to the skies and maybe to each other in what feels like an ancient version of the stark market floor. Ah, the sweet melody of commerce in 1800 BCE. First things first, let's talk money. Except, spoiler alert, there's no jingling of coins here. You're dealing in barley, the golden grain that doubles as currency. It's a clever system, really, since barley keeps you both fed and financially fluid. But don't get too romantic about the simplicity of it all. The reality of trading with sacks of barley is that it's about as convenient as paying your lunch tab with bundles of hay. Yet, here you are, bartering your way through the bustling bazaar, where the aroma of spices competes with the less-than-pleasant scent of the river. Speaking of which, the Euphrates River is the artery of this commercial powerhouse. Picture it, boats laden with everything from copper to textiles navigating the waters, driven by a combination of trade ambitions and decent rowing skills. The logistics of trade back then make modern supply chains look like child's play. Distances that seem trivial today took weeks, if not months, to cover. It's a feat of organization, involving everything from intricate record-keeping on clay tablets to hoping your goods don't end up feeding the fish. Now, let's not forget the grand maestro of Babylonian commerce, the Code of Hammurabi. This isn't just some dusty old tablet, it's the blueprint for business regulations. Imagine a legal system where if you shortchange someone, you're not just getting a slap on the wrist. No, it's more like a slap with a giant stone slab. Fair trade is the law of the land, quite literally etched in stone. Hammurabi's code ensures that everyone, from the lowliest farmer to the wealthiest merchant, knows the rules of the game, or at least the consequences of cheating at it. The bazaar itself is a sensory overload, and the modern-day supermarket has nothing on this chaos. Traders from all over Mesopotamia gather here, shouting in a cacophony of languages and dialects, each trying to outdo the other in volume and enthusiasm. It's an economic symphony where prices are as negotiable as a used chariot. Don't get too caught up in the romance of the exotic marketplace, though. This is survival, plain and simple. Everyone here is hustling, and the stakes are as high as the ziggurats towering over the city. In the midst of this, you might hear a few tall tales about Babylon's legendary wealth and grandeur. Sure, it's a city of wonders, but let's not forget the gritty underbelly. The grandeur is often reserved for those at the top, while many are left to the mercy of the market and the whims of the wealthy. The Code of Hammurabi tries to level the playing field, but there's only so much a slab of stone can do in a world where power often trumps fairness. So here you are in the thick of it, part of the daily rhythm of Babylon. The sun climbs higher, and the market hums along, a living, breathing entity that's as unpredictable as the Euphrates current. The day is young, and while the merchants are busy haggling, you're soaking in the reality and the myths of ancient Babylonian life. Remember, the stories you hear and the sights you see are just as much about survival as they are about spectacle. Welcome to your day in the life of ancient Babylon, where every grain of barley counts. From the marketplace frenzy, you wander deeper into the beating heart of Babylon, where the architecture seems to bend reality itself. Welcome to the city that's been the subject of countless legends, each one taller than the last. Now, before you get seduced by the allure of ancient wonders, let's sift through the facts, shall we? First up, the Ishtar Gate, Babylon's grand entrance and an absolute showstopper. This isn't your average city gate. It's a ceremonial arch decked out in glazed bricks that shine like a peacock on a sunny day. You've got blues and golds, so vivid they'd make a modern art critic blush. And the reliefs, lions, bulls and dragons parade along the walls, a not-so-subtle reminder of Babylon's power. Built around 575 BCE under King Nebuchadnezzar Roman II, this gate was part of the processional way, a route that screamed opulence and authority. It wasn't just a passage. It was a statement, a red carpet rolled out for deities and dignitaries alike. Now, you've probably heard whispers about the Hanging Gardens, that infamous wonder of the ancient world. Picture lush terraces cascading with greenery, a floating oasis in the desert. Sounds like a dream, doesn't it? That's because it might be. Despite the romantic tales, there's scant evidence these gardens ever existed. No archaeological trace, no contemporary Babylonian records. Just a lot of enthusiastic Greek historians with vivid imaginations. It's the ancient equivalent of a viral tweet. Fascinating, but perhaps not entirely factual. What we do know is that Nebuchadnezzar was keen on impressing his wife, Amides of Media, who missed the green hills of her homeland. Whether he built an actual garden or just a killer flower box remains a mystery. But hey, why let facts get in the way of a good story? What's undeniable is Babylon's knack for engineering marvels. They had irrigation systems that would make a modern contractor weep with envy, using a combination of pumps and canals to turn arid land into fertile ground. Stepping away from the architectural eye candy, let's talk urban planning. Babylon wasn't just a city, it was a chessboard of power and ambition. Streets laid out in a grid, ziggurats towering over it all. The city was as much about control as it was about aesthetic appeal. The Euphrates River didn't just provide water, it split the city, creating districts that kept the elite comfortably separated from the common folk. Think of it as an ancient version of zoning laws, where your address said everything about your social standing. And oh, the social hierarchies. Babylonian society was a pyramid, and not the kind you'd want to climb. At the top, you had the king and his cronies, lounging in luxury with palaces and banquets that could feed half the city. Below them, a stratum of priests, scribes, and officials who kept the wheels turning and the wine flowing. If you were a craftsman or merchant, you might snag a middle-class lifestyle, assuming you could navigate the city's ruthless economy. But the majority, they were out there in the sun, toiling in fields or hauling bricks for those architectural wonders we just swooned over. Daily life for the average Babylonian wasn't all that glamorous. Imagine working dawn till dusk just to keep barley in your bowl, while the rich feasted on delicacies like figs and roast lamb. Not exactly an egalitarian paradise, is it? Yet, for all its inequities, Babylon was a place of opportunity, if you played your cards right. The Code of Hammurabi, with its Ephronite justice, laid down the law with a heavy hand, but it also offered protection and structure, a framework where even the lowliest slave could theoretically rise if they found favor or fortune. It was a system that balanced harsh realities with tantalizing possibilities. As you drift through the city, the clamor of voices, the scent of spices, and the sheer scale of it all create a dizzying tapestry. Babylon is a place where the extraordinary and the everyday coexist, a city built on dreams, both fulfilled and unfulfilled. It's a reminder that behind every myth lies a kernel of truth, wrapped in layers of human ambition and folly. And as you continue your journey, keep this in mind. While the stones of Babylon endure, it's the stories we tell that truly stand the test of time. But hold your horses, or should I say, your donkeys, because now it's time to dive into what kept Babylon ticking beyond its bustling marketplaces and towering architecture. The world of scribes and scholars. Forget the Instagram influencer. In ancient Babylon, if you wanted to be somebody, you picked up a stylus and mastered cuneiform, the script that put the form in formidable. You might be wondering why literacy was such a big deal back then, especially when the written word was literally carved into clay tablets, not jotted down in a handy notebook. Well, it turns out that words were power, and the scribes were the wielders of this mighty tool. Scribes in Babylon were the rock stars of record-keeping, the unsung heroes behind the scenes, ensuring that every barley transaction, legal ruling, and royal decree was etched into history. And trust me, ancient Babylon had a lot of history to etch. These scribes were trained in what can only be described as the Ivy League of ancient educational institutions, the Adaba, or tablet house. Imagine Hogwarts. But instead of casting spells, you're learning how to write the ancient equivalent of a grocery list. The curriculum was rigorous, and the stakes were high. Completing your education was like surviving a season of Survivor, only with more clay dust and less sunscreen. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. The Adaba wasn't all fun and games. Picture this, a room filled with students hunched over clay tablets, each trying to master the art of pressing a reed stylus into clay to create those iconic wedge-shaped marks. It's like learning to type, but one painstaking symbol at a time. And if you messed up, well, there was no backspace key. You either started over or hoped the teacher wouldn't notice your creative interpretations of Sumerian grammar. Speaking of teachers, they were known to be a tough lot. Forget about getting an apple for the teacher. You'd be lucky if you got a break from the cane. The ancient Babylonians had no qualms about using corporal punishment as a motivational tool. If you think your school days were rough, just be thankful you didn't have to deal with a tutor whose idea of encouragement involved a stick. But why all this fuss over literacy, you ask? The answer is simple: control and continuity. In a civilization as complex as Babylon's, maintaining records was crucial. Whether it was keeping track of trade, legal disputes, or astronomical observations, someone had to make sure the details were right. And those details mattered. A single misplaced cuneiform sign could mean the difference between a prosperous trade deal and a financial disaster. Talk about pressure. Yet, beyond the practicalities, there was an element of prestige to being a scribe. You weren't just writing, you were shaping the narrative of an empire. This was a society that valued knowledge, even if access to it was reserved for the privileged few. But let's not romanticize this too much. Knowledge was a commodity, and not everyone was buying. Literacy wasn't just about reading and writing. It was about wielding influence in a world where words could change destinies. As you wander through the midday sun, think about the countless clay tablets lying beneath your feet, each one a silent testament to the scribes who once toiled over them. They were the chroniclers of their time, capturing the ebb and flow of Babylonian life, recording everything from grand conquests to the price of fish at the local market. It's a reminder that behind every monumental empire are the quiet scribes who ensured its stories endured. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Despite the glamour of being a scribe, the reality was that most Babylonians weren't spending their days engaged in intellectual pursuits. For the majority, life was less about decoding cuneiform and more about making sure they didn't run out of barley before the next harvest. The Edaba was a world apart, an elite enclave where the future movers and shakers of Babylon learned their craft. As the day presses on and the shadows grow long, you start to appreciate the irony of it all. In a city famed for its grandiose architecture and legendary gardens, it's the scribes, those humble stewards of knowledge, who might just be Babylon's most enduring legacy. Through their eyes, we catch a glimpse of a world that was as much about survival as it was about spectacle, where the power of the pen, or in this case, the stylus, was felt in every corner of society. So, as you continue your journey through Babylon's storied streets, remember that every tale, every myth, and every legend has its roots in the scribes' diligent work. They're the real architects of history, building a narrative brick by brick, cuneiform sign by cuneiform sign. And while the stones of Babylon may crumble, the stories they etched into clay will endure, whispering to us across the millennia. As afternoon shadows stretch across the streets of Babylon, you turn your attention towards a different kind of power, the divine. In this city of wonders, gods and goddesses don't just hover in the spiritual realm. They're as much a part of daily life as the barley you've been bartering. And when it comes to Babylon, one deity is the star of the show, Marduk. Think of him as the ancient equivalent of a rock star with a deity complex, revered as the patron god of the city and the head honcho of the Babylonian pantheon. Now, before we dive into the divine drama, let's clear up a few clichés. Yes, Marduk is often depicted as a dragon slayer, but don't let that epic imagery fool you into thinking this is just a myth spun for bedtime stories. Marduk's rise to power wasn't just about besting mythical beasts. It was a reflection of Babylon's own ambitious ascent. His story is chronicled in the Enuma-Elish, a creation epic that's pretty much the Babylonian equivalent of a blockbuster movie script. In it, Marduk vanquishes Tiamat, the chaotic sea monster, and fashions the world from her remains, a neat metaphor for order triumphing over chaos, and coincidentally, Babylon over its rivals. In practical terms, Marduk's cult wasn't just about worship. It was a cornerstone of Babylon's political strategy. His temple, the Grand Esagila, wasn't merely an architectural marvel. It was the economic and spiritual heart of the city. Located near the ziggurat Eremenenki, which some historians speculate inspired the biblical Tower of Babel, these structures were symbols of Babylon's might and divine favor. The temple complex was a veritable city within a city, bustling with priests, scribes, and even merchants who catered to the needs of the gods and the people who served them. But let's talk temple economics, because surprise, surprise, running a religious powerhouse wasn't cheap. The temple owned vast tracts of land, operated workshops, and controlled a sizable workforce. It was a well-oiled machine that not only collected offerings, but also engaged in trade. Picture this, priests negotiating trade deals or overseeing harvests. It's like your local priest doubling as a CEO, because in Babylon, spirituality and economics were as intertwined as the snakes on Marduk's staff. The priests, or N2, were the linchpins of this operation. Far from being mere caretakers of sacred rituals, these guys wielded significant influence. They were the ancient equivalent of a board of directors, managing temple assets and ensuring the guards got their due. And let's not forget the Baru, or diviners. who interpreted omens and advised kings. These religious specialists were the medieval Google, consulted for everything from whether to go to war to picking the right day for a royal wedding. They wielded the power of prophecy, albeit with a flair for the dramatic. Rituals themselves were no small affair. Daily ceremonies involved offerings of food, drink, and incense, all meticulously recorded on, you guessed it, clay tablets. And while the guards feasted, the leftovers often went to sustain the temple staff. It was a divine trickle-down economy, if you will. Special festivals could be even more extravagant, with processions, music, and sacrifices. The New Year's festival, Akidu, was a city-wide bash that reaffirmed Marduk's supremacy and the king's divine mandate. It was part religious observance, part political theatre, ensuring the guards and the people were reminded of who was in charge. But let's not forget the human element in this divine drama. For the average Babylonian, these guards were both protectors and patrons. Whether you were a farmer praying for rain or a merchant seeking success, the guards were your goda for a little cosmic help. And if things went south, well, it was probably because you ticked off one of the deities. In a world where natural disasters and economic downturns were all too common, faith in the gods offered both solace and scapegoats. Religion in Babylon wasn't just about personal piety. It was a blueprint for societal norms. The gods dictated everything from ethical behavior to legal codes. Hammurabi's code, that legal monolith we've met before, was said to be inspired by divine law. The idea that justice was a celestial mandate gave the king's decrees an authority that went beyond mere human governance. It was a cosmic endorsement, lending gravitas to the rule of law in a society where the divine and the mundane walked hand in hand. From politics to personal life, the divine influence was inescapable. Marriages, for example, weren't just family affairs. They were also contractual obligations, often sealed with oaths to the gods. And don't even think about breaking one of these sacred bonds, unless you fancied a divine retribution that made earthly punishments look like a slap on the wrist. As you wander past the temple precincts, the scent of incense mingling with the city's more earthy aromas, consider the sheer complexity of Babylonian religion. It was more than just worship. It was a system of power and influence that shaped every aspect of life. The gods were omnipresent, their stories woven into the fabric of society, their temples standing as monuments to human ambition and devotion. So, as the sun dips lower and the city's temple bells echo into the evening, take a moment to appreciate the paradox of Babylon. A city of both grandeur and grit, where the divine and the mundane are forever entwined. Here, the myths and the realities coexist, each adding layers to the rich tapestry of history, a history that's still being written, one clay tablet at a time. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the ziggurats and temple spires of Babylon, our focus shifts to the governance of this ancient metropolis. And no discussion about Babylonian power is complete without mentioning King Hammurabi, the ruler who turned law into an art form, and not just any art form, but one with the finesse of a courtroom drama meets a stone tablet chisel. Now, let's get one thing straight. Hammurabi wasn't just some king who needed a hobby. He was a shrewd leader who understood that, in a world teetering on the edge of chaos, order was the new black. Enter the Code of Hammurabi, a legal system so comprehensive it makes modern law books look like light reading. We're talking 282 laws, each as meticulously crafted as a Babylonian mosaic. From commercial transactions to family law and crime and punishment, Hammurabi's code covered it all, practically the ancient equivalent of an administrative Swiss Army knife. But before you get misty-eyed over the poetic justice of it all, let's peel back the layers. The Code of Hammurabi was less about fairness and more about maintaining the social hierarchy. You see, justice in Hammurabi's Babylon was a bit of a sliding scale. For example, if a nobleman put out another nobleman's eye, he'd have to hand over one of his own, a grim take on eye for an eye. But if the same nobleman blinded a commoner, he might only face a fine, not exactly what you'd call egalitarian. And don't even get me started on the penalties for stealing. Let's just say that if you were caught pilfering in Babylon, you'd soon be missing more than just your ill-gotten gains. This was justice served with a side of spectacle, a public reminder that crime didn't pay, unless you were on the receiving end of the fines, of course. But the law wasn't just about punishment. It also established economic principles that laid the foundation for Babylon's prosperity. Hammurabi's code regulated trade, set wages, and even dictated the price of renting an ox. Yes, you heard that right. Renting an ox came with its own legal stipulations. Talk about micromanagement. This legal framework was enforced by a network of officials and judges who ensured that Hammurabi's words were more than just decorative carvings on a stone slab. And while we might imagine these judges as stern figures in flowing robes, they were more like the pragmatic enforcers of a complex bureaucracy. They navigated a world where every decision could ripple through the economy like a stone skipping across the Euphrates. Now, you might be wondering why Hammurabi's code is such a big deal. After all, legal systems have come and gone throughout history. But Hammurabi's achievement was in codifying the law in a form that was accessible. Well, as accessible as a 7-foot-tall stone monument could be. It was a public declaration of what was expected of every Babylonian and what they could expect in return. It was the ancient version of sticking the rules up on the break room wall for all to see. But let's not romanticize this too much. The code was as much a tool for consolidating Hammurabi's power as it was for ensuring justice. It reinforced the king's divine mandate, portraying him as the shepherd of his people, guiding them with the wisdom of the gods. The reality was more about maintaining control in a city where power was always just one rebellion away from slipping through his fingers. As we bid farewell to the age of Hammurabi, it's tempting to view Babylon through the sepia-tinted lens of its golden age. The city was a beacon of civilization, a center of culture and commerce that lit up the ancient world like a torch in the dark. But let's strip away the romance and face the grit. Babylon was as much a tale of struggle and survival as it was one of glory and grandeur. From the outside, Babylon seemed like a living legend, a city of hanging gardens and towering ziggurats. But beneath that veneer was a society grappling with the same issues we face today: inequality, power struggles, and the eternal dance between order and chaos. The reality is that Babylon's legacy is not just in its architectural wonders or its mythical gardens, but in the way it laid the groundwork for future civilizations to wrestle with the complexities of governance, law, and society. As we turn the final page on our day in the life of ancient Babylon, let's remember that every story has two sides: the myth and the reality, the dream and the daily grind. Babylon was a city where the extraordinary met the everyday, where the past echoes into the present, reminding us that history is as much about the people as it is about the places they built. So, as you drift into the embrace of sleep, take with you the stories of Babylon, the facts and the fables, the grandeur and the grit. For in this ancient city, we find not just the remnants of a bygone era, but the roots of our own. And as the last light fades from the Babylonian skyline, remember that history, much like the Euphrates, flows ever onward, carrying with it the tales of those who dared to dream beneath its stars. In the labyrinth of ancient Rome, young Julius Caesar was navigating the political landscape with the grace of a tightrope walker who's just realized he's afraid of heights. Born in July 100 BCE, Julius was thrust into a world where family background was more valuable than a gold-plated chariot. The Julii family claimed descent from none other than Venus, the goddess of love herself. But let's be honest, that's like saying your great-great-grandfather was a rock star without ever having seen him strum a lute. This divine lineage wasn't exactly verifiable, but it sure made a great icebreaker at Roman dinner parties. Caesar's early years weren't exactly paved with gold. His father, Gaius Julius Caesar, was a praetor, which is a fancy way of saying he was a middle management type in the Roman political hierarchy. His mother, Aurelia Carta, was known for her intelligence and influence, which in Roman society was akin to being a secret weapon in the cutthroat world of politics. Julius had a pedigree that was respectable enough to open doors, but not quite enough to have them flung wide open. Education for a young Roman noble was no walk in the park, unless that park was filled with scrolls, rhetoric, and the occasional philosophical debate. Caesar was educated in rhetoric and philosophy, which in practical terms meant he could argue his way out of a corner and look good doing it. He studied under Marcus Antonius Nifo, a celebrated teacher who was the ancient equivalent of a TED talk sensation, minus the stage lights and snazzy headset. But here's where Caesar's story starts to get spicy. Around 85 BCE, when Caesar was just a teenager, his father died suddenly, leaving him the man of the house. Not exactly the best timing for a crash course in leadership, but hey, Rome wasn't built on convenience. The family's fortunes were modest, and to make matters worse, political factions in Rome were playing a game of thrones that would make any binge-watcher salivate. The Optimates and Populares were the main players. The Optimates, the conservative champions of the Senate, were basically the old-school tie brigade, while the Populares were the populists, appealing directly to the masses. Caesar's family sided with the Populares, which would be like betting on the underdog in a gladiator match. As if navigating political alliances wasn't challenging enough, Caesar had to contend with the infamous dictator, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who had a penchant for purging his enemies. Sulla had a prescription list, a who's who of who's going to have a bad day, and Caesar's name was practically penciled in. Why? Because he was married to Cornelia, the daughter of Cinna, Sulla's political rival. Sulla demanded that Caesar divorce Cornelia, but Caesar, ever the romantic, or perhaps just stubborn, refused. This decision forced him to go on the lam, living a fugitive's life until some influential friends, possibly with the aid of a bribe or two, because Roman politics was nothing if not transactional, convinced Sulla to show mercy. Sulla reportedly said he saw many a Marius in Caesar, a cryptic warning that perhaps Sulla foresaw Caesar's rise and the chaos it would eventually unleash. Now, speaking of marriages, Caesar's approach to them was as pragmatic as a Roman engineer's to aqueducts. His marriage to Cornelia ended with her death, and he quickly remarried, this time to Pompeia, a granddaughter of Sulla. This was less about love and more a move on the political chessboard. But when a scandal involving Pompeia and a man dressed as a woman, typical Roman party antics, threatened his reputation, Caesar divorced her with the famous line, "Caesar's wife must be above suspicion." This phrase could have been the ancient precursor to modern relationship goals, though it's hard to imagine it getting many likes on social media today. So, how did Caesar manage to climb the slippery pole of Roman politics? Charm and debt. Lots of debt. Borrowing money was practically a hobby for Caesar, as he courted the support of Rome's power brokers. He was like that friend who always promises to pay you back next week, but you know, deep down, that it's never going to happen. But in Caesar's case, his creditors were willing to wait because they saw potential in him, potential that would eventually be realized in a big way. Caesar's early political maneuvers involved aligning himself with influential figures. Think of them as the ancient Roman equivalent of networking at a high-stakes cocktail party. He secured a position as a military tribune, then worked his way up to quaestor in 69 BCE, a role that was something like being the CFO of a small city-state. This position allowed him to build connections and gather support, and he did so with the finesse of a seasoned diplomat. Caesar's rise was marked by a series of calculated risks that would have made even the most daring gambler sweat. He understood that in Rome, where fortunes shifted faster than the Tiber's current, alliances were crucial. He was a master at reading people and situations, a skill that served him well as he navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics. Whether by luck or sheer cunning, each move he made brought him closer to the pinnacle of power. But let's not sugarcoat it. Rome was a pressure cooker of ambition and betrayal. Caesar's early maneuvering set the stage for what would later become one of the most dramatic careers in history. He wasn't just a product of his time. He was a force that reshaped it. With a little help from Venus, or rather, the myth of her, a lot of borrowing, and a knack for making the right friends, young Julius was on his way to becoming a name that would echo through the ages. Not bad for a guy who started out on the wrong side of a dictator's kill list. As Caesar climbed the rungs of Roman power like a man scrambling up a greased pole, his ambitions were already stretching far beyond the cramped confines of the Senate. By the time he was through with Rome, he wanted his name to be whispered in awe from the bustling markets of the Forum to the windswept shores of Britannia. But first, he needed to prove that he was more than just a pretty face with a good line in rhetoric. Enter Gaul, stage left. For those who skipped history class, Gaul was the sprawling region that roughly covers modern-day France, Luxembourg, Belgium, most of Switzerland, and parts of Italy, the Netherlands, and Germany. And let's be honest, conquering Gaul was like trying to win a board game where the rules change every time you roll the dice. It was divided into a patchwork of tribal factions, each with its own agenda, alliances, and no surprise here, axes to grind. The year was 58 BCE, and Caesar, now a proconsul with an army at his back, was about to embark on a conquest that would redefine his career, and frankly, make him the talk of the empire. Caesar's military campaigns in Gaul were a masterclass in strategy, audacity, and yes, ruthlessness. Let's start with the Battle of Bibracte, where Caesar faced off against the Helvetii, a tribe that decided to pack up and move across Gaul like a migrating herd of particularly aggressive cattle. Caesar wasn't having it. With a Roman force of about 30,000, he engaged the Helvetii, who numbered around 90,000. A bit like David taking on Goliath, if David also had a few extra slingshots up his sleeve. Over 2 days of fierce fighting, Caesar emerged victorious, sending the Helvetii scampering back to their mountains. The Helvetii had been planning to settle down with a nice patch of farmland, but Caesar had a different vision, one that involved them not being there. Then there was the Battle of Alesia in 52 BCE, where Caesar faced an uprising led by Vercingetorix, a name that sounds like a bad Scrabble hand, but was actually a formidable Gallic chieftain. Vercingetorix had managed to unite various tribes against the Romans, which was no small feat given that these tribes usually preferred fighting each other over anyone else. Alesia was a fortress perched atop a hill, and Vercingetorix was holed up there with his army. Caesar, ever the tactician, decided to starve them out, constructing a double ring of fortifications that stretched over 18 kilometers. Yes, you heard that right. 18 kilometers of walls, ditches, and traps, all to keep the Gauls in and their reinforcements out. It was a siege that would have made even the most seasoned architect weep at the logistics. The siege of Alesia was brutal. Inside, Vercingetorix's men were running out of food faster than a college student at the end of the month, while outside, Caesar's forces faced relentless attacks from Gallic reinforcements. But Caesar held his nerve, and after a series of desperate battles, the Gallic relief force was defeated, and Vercingetorix had no choice but to surrender. The victory was a turning point. Caesar had effectively broken the back of Gallic resistance, and his reputation soared to new heights. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was war, and the cost was astronomical. It's estimated that over 1 million Gauls were killed, and another 1 million were enslaved during Caesar's campaigns. It's the kind of arithmetic that makes you question the moral calculus of ancient glory. Now, while all this was happening, Caesar was also busy writing his commentaries on the Gallic War. And if you're picturing him scribbling away by candlelight, think again. Caesar's commentaries were less about recording history and more about crafting his legend. They were the ancient version of a PR campaign, painting him as the hero of the hour, a general with the tactical brilliance of a chess grandmaster and the courage of a lion. He wrote in the third person, a literary sleight of hand that made his victories seem both inevitable and ordained by the gods. It was as if Caesar was simultaneously the star of the show and its most ardent critic. In reality, Caesar's campaigns were marked by a level of brutality that would make a Game of Thrones episode look like a picnic. Villages were razed, populations uprooted. The Gallic Wars weren't just a series of battles. They were a transformative event that reshaped the social and political landscape of Western Europe. But in Rome, Caesar's victories translated into political capital. He had not only expanded the boundaries of the Republic, but also stuffed its coffers with loot and slaves, ensuring his place among Rome's elite. Yet, while Caesar basked in the glory of his conquests, back in Rome, the political climate was heating up faster than a pot on a Roman stove. The Senate, ever the collection of backstabbers and schemers, was growing uneasy. Caesar's growing power and popularity were like a thundercloud on the horizon, and many senators feared he might just ride into Rome and sweep away the old order. They weren't entirely wrong to worry. Caesar had shown a knack for defying expectations and rewriting the rules, a trait that would eventually lead to one of history's most famous betrayals. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's just say that Caesar's adventures in Gaul were anything but a walk in the Forum. They were a prelude to greater things, and as we all know, the road to power is paved with ambition, intrigue, and a fair amount of blood. While Caesar was busy turning Gaul into his personal fiefdom, back in Rome, the Senate was experiencing more jitters than a cat at a dog show. You see, Caesar's victories had left him with a fan base that would make a modern influencer weep with envy. But unlike your average social media star, Caesar wasn't selling detox teas. He was peddling power. He capitalized on his military triumphs to catapult himself into the upper echelons of Roman politics, a move that was as audacious as it was calculated. Now, in the high-stakes game of Roman politics, alliances were your best insurance policy. Enter the first triumvirate, a not-so-secret club formed in 60 BCE. Imagine Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus sharing a handshake that would turn Rome upside down. Pompey, a military genius in his own right, and Crassus, the richest man in Rome, who could probably buy and sell half the city, joined forces with Caesar in a pact that was basically the ancient equivalent of a superhero team-up, but with more backstabbing. This informal alliance was designed to bypass the Senate's chokehold on power. Crassus brought the cash, Pompey brought the military muscle, and Caesar brought the charisma and cunning. Together, they ruled the roost, at least for a while. Caesar was elected consul in 59 BCE, and from there he pushed through a series of populist reforms that had the Senate clutching their togas in horror. Land reforms, check. Redistribution of wealth, double check. Caesar was playing the long game, and his moves were as smooth as a Roman marble statue. But let's not pretend Caesar was a one-trick pony. He knew that to keep the masses on his side, he needed more than just political maneuvers. Enter the public spectacles, a tool as old as politics itself. Caesar was the maestro of making the people love him, throwing lavish games and gladiatorial contests that had Rome buzzing. Picture a Colosseum packed to the rafters, the crowd roaring as gladiators clashed below, and Caesar sitting in the VIP box, basking in the glow of public adoration. These spectacles were more than just entertainment. They were a demonstration of power and generosity, a way to keep the populace both entertained and loyal. However, before you start thinking of Caesar as the ultimate people's champion, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the river, the Rubicon. In 49 BCE, Caesar stood on the banks of this seemingly insignificant stream, a line in the sand that marked the boundary between his province and Italy proper. By crossing it with his army, he was committing an act of war against Rome. The phrase, crossing the Rubicon, has since become synonymous with passing the point of no return, a fitting description for Caesar's audacious gamble. Why did he do it? Well, the Senate, tired of Caesar's growing influence, had ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar, never one to play by the rules if he could rewrite them, saw this as a political death sentence. So, with the words, Alia iacta est, the die is cast, reportedly on his lips, he crossed the Rubicon and plunged Rome into civil war. It was a move that was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, depending on which side of the Senate you were on. The chaos that ensued was nothing short of epic. Rome wasn't just a city, it was the beating heart of an empire, and Caesar's actions sent shockwaves through its very core. Civil war erupted, pitting Caesar against Pompey, his former ally turned arch-nemesis. It was like a blockbuster movie with all the drama and none of the CGI. Battles raged across the Roman world, with Caesar eventually emerging victorious at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE, where he defeated Pompey despite being outnumbered nearly 2-1. Pompey fled to Egypt, only to be assassinated, leaving Caesar the unchallenged ruler of Rome. But in the world of Roman politics, victory was only the beginning of the trouble. With his enemies vanquished, Caesar returned to Rome not as a hero, but as a dictator. Now, let's talk about that title, Dictator for Life. It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, but in Rome it was a big deal. The position of dictator was meant to be temporary, a role assumed during emergencies. But Caesar, ever the rule-bender, took it a step further. The Senate, perhaps hoping to placate him or simply too cowed to object, declared him Dictator Perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity. It was an unprecedented move that effectively crowned him the monarch Rome never wanted. But let's peel back the veneer of power and see what lay beneath. As dictator, Caesar implemented reforms designed to stabilize the Republic and improve the lives of its citizens. He reorganized the calendar, giving us the Julian calendar, a precursor to the one we use today. He also expanded the Senate, adding more members from across the empire, a move that diluted the power of the old aristocracy and increased representation. Public works, debt restructuring, and land distribution were all part of his agenda. In theory, Caesar was building a better Rome. Yet, the reality was more complex. While his reforms were popular with the masses, they made him a target for aristocrats who saw their influence waning. Caesar's concentration of power, his disregard for tradition, and his flair for the dramatic made him a divisive figure. The title of Dictator for life, while cementing his authority, also painted a bullseye on his back. To some, he was a visionary, to others, a tyrant. The Senate, or what was left of its old guard, was simmering with discontent. They feared that Caesar's aspirations would lead to the death of the Republic, a fear that wasn't entirely unfounded. In the end, Caesar's rule was a balancing act on a knife's edge. His rise to power was a masterclass in ambition, charisma, and strategic brilliance, yet it was also a cautionary tale of the perils of absolute power. As he solidified his grip on Rome, the cracks in the facade were already beginning to show. The Rubicon had been crossed, but the journey was far from over. Caesar's story, like Rome itself, was a tapestry of glory and tragedy, woven with threads of ambition and betrayal. And as history would soon reveal, even the mightiest of leaders must meet their fate. But hold on tight, because this tale of power, intrigue, and ambition has a few more turns before the final act. Stay tuned, as Caesar's dramatic journey continues, and the fate of Rome hangs in the balance. As the curtain rose on the final act of Julius Caesar's life, the stage was set for a drama that even Shakespeare would have envied. Rome was a city of marble facades and gritty back alleys, where power plays unfolded like a high-stakes chess match, only with more bloodshed. Caesar, now dictator for life, was a man on top of the world, yet teetering on the edge of an abyss he couldn't see. His reforms had won him the adoration of the masses, but they also painted a target on his back, visible to anyone with a dagger and a grudge. The Senate, a hive of political intrigue, was buzzing with the kind of anxiety that comes when the old order feels its grip slipping. Picture Caesar, a colossus striding through Rome, unaware that his every move was under scrutiny. His once firm allies, like Brutus and Cassius, were now giving him side-eye that could cut through the thickest Roman fog. Brutus, whose family tree was rooted in the Republic's founding myths, was particularly torn. He was like a character in a soap opera, caught between loyalty to a mentor and fidelity to the Republic's ideals. Meanwhile, Cassius, a senator with the cunning of a fox and an ego to match, saw Caesar's growing power as a personal affront. It didn't help that Caesar had recently snubbed him for a position of military command. Petty, maybe, but when your ego's as fragile as a Roman vase, slights have a way of fanning the flames of conspiracy. Now, here's where things get as tangled as a Roman toga on a windy day. Caesar's reforms were shaking things up faster than a centurion at a wine festival. He was redistributing land, reducing debt, and expanding the Senate to include more of his supporters, which was like inviting the fox into the henhouse. To the old guard, these moves were a direct threat to their status and influence. The Senate, once the epicenter of Roman power, was starting to feel like a relic of a bygone era, and some members were none too pleased about it. Enter the conspiracy, a plot so thick you could cut it with a gladius. At its core were about 60 senators, each with their own axe to grind. Their motives were a cocktail of political, personal, and let's be honest, a fair bit of envy. The idea of one man holding so much power was anathema to them. Sure, Caesar was a visionary, but to them he also looked suspiciously like a monarch in a republic's clothing. The irony was palpable. The liberators, as they fancied themselves, were plotting to murder a man in the name of freedom. March 1544 BCE dawned like any other day in Rome, with the usual hustle and bustle of a city that never slept. The Ides of March, a date forever etched in history, was upon them. Caesar, despite numerous warnings, even from a soothsayer who famously told him to beware, decided to attend a Senate meeting at the theater of Pompey. He was no fan of superstition, and perhaps he thought himself invincible. After all, he had crossed the Rubicon, defeated Pompey, and rewritten the rules of Roman politics. How could a handful of disgruntled senators pose a threat? As Caesar made his way to the meeting, the conspirators were already in position, like actors waiting in the wings. The plan was as bold as it was audacious. Assassinate Caesar in broad daylight, in the heart of Rome. The symbolism was potent. Kill the dictator in the very place where the Republic had once thrived. History tells us that as Caesar entered the Senate chamber, he was surrounded by the conspirators. It was a scene that played out with the precision of a tragic drama. They attacked swiftly, each senator driving a dagger into Caesar, ensuring that no one man bore the guilt alone. Accounts vary, but some say he was stabbed 23 times. Talk about overkill. And then there was Brutus, the most famous of the conspirators. Legend has it that Caesar's last words were "Et tu, Brute," a cry of betrayal that echoed through time. Whether he actually said it is up for debate, but the sentiment captures the essence of the moment. Here was a man who had defied kings, only to be brought low by those he had once called friends. The irony was Shakespearean before Shakespeare even existed. In the immediate aftermath of the assassination, chaos reigned supreme. The liberators expected to be hailed as heroes, saviors of the Republic. Instead, they found themselves in a city teetering on the brink of anarchy. The common people, who had adored Caesar, were not in a forgiving mood. The liberators had underestimated the depth of Caesar's popularity, a miscalculation that would cost them dearly. Rome was a cauldron of unrest, and the conspirators soon realized they had opened a Pandora's box. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, seized the moment with the deftness of a seasoned politician. He delivered a eulogy that was less about mourning and more about mobilizing public sentiment. With words that dripped with pathos and subtle manipulation, Antony turned the tide against the conspirators. The people of Rome, swayed by Antony's oratory and their own sense of loss, were soon baying for the blood of those who had dared to kill their beloved leader. The irony of it all was that, in attempting to save the Republic, the assassins had unwittingly set the stage for its demise. Caesar's death plunged Rome into a new wave of civil wars, as factions battled for control. The Republic they claimed to protect was already on life support, and their actions had pulled the plug. In the power vacuum that followed, Rome saw the rise of a new order, one that would eventually lead to the establishment of the Roman Empire under Augustus. In the grand tapestry of history, Caesar's assassination was a pivotal moment. It marked the end of one era and the beginning of another, a transition from republic to empire. Yet, even as the dust settled, the questions lingered. Was Caesar a tyrant deserving of his fate, or a visionary cut down before his time? The truth, as always, is more complex than the legends suggest. He was both the architect of his own downfall and a victim of the very system he sought to reform. As the echoes of the ides of March faded, Rome was left to grapple with the consequences. The streets ran red with the blood of retribution, and the Republic's ideals lay shattered, caught in the crossfire of ambition and betrayal. Caesar's legacy, like his life, was a mosaic of triumph and tragedy, a testament to the heights of human ambition and the depths of its folly. So, as we leave this chapter of history, remember this. In the game of power, even the mightiest can fall. Caesar's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that the path to greatness is fraught with peril, and the shadows of betrayal are never far behind. But don't tune out just yet. There's one more act in this epic saga, and the fate of Rome hangs in the balance. Stay with us as we delve into the final chapter of this tumultuous tale, where the echoes of the past reverberate into the future, and the seeds of empire take root in the ashes of the Republic. As we delve into the final act of this tumultuous tale, it's time to unravel the enigma of Julius Caesar's legacy, a jigsaw puzzle of ambition, reform, and blood-stained betrayal. You might say his life was like a Roman mosaic. From a distance, a picture of grandeur, but up close, a chaotic assembly of contradictions. His assassination on the Ides of March 44 BCE didn't just stab at his physical form. It sent shockwaves that reverberated through the annals of history. Let's start with the immediate aftermath. Caesar's death left Rome in a state of chaos more profound than a toga party gone wrong. The Republic, already wobbling like a drunk on a cobblestone street, was on the brink of collapse. Enter stage left, Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted heir, who was barely out of his teenage years when he seized the reins of power. Octavian, later known as Augustus, proved to be a political virtuoso, deftly maneuvering through the treacherous waters left swirling by Caesar's demise. With a mix of cunning diplomacy and calculated ruthlessness, he sidestepped the same fate as his uncle, ushering in the Roman Empire and a new era of relative stability. Augustus was like the clean-up crew after a wild party, sweeping away the broken remnants of the Republic and laying the foundations for imperial rule. But Caesar's impact wasn't limited to political restructurings or family dramas. It was a seismic shift that reshaped Roman society and governance. His reforms, particularly those that expanded the Senate and restructured debts, aimed at democratizing the power structure, albeit with himself at the helm. Caesar was a visionary who saw Rome as the epicenter of a vast empire, not just a city-state with delusions of grandeur. Yet, his consolidation of power and title of Dictator for life were anathema to the ideals of the Republic, painting him as both a reformer and a tyrant. It's as if he was trying to modernize the Roman political system with one hand while clutching its ancient traditions with the other, a balancing act that ultimately unbalanced him. Fast forward to the Renaissance, when history and myth began to tango in earnest. Enter William Shakespeare, the bard who immortalized Caesar's story with more dramatic flair than a Roman chariot race. In his play Julius Caesar, Shakespeare crafted a narrative dripping with intrigue and moral ambiguity. Here's where the lines blur. Actual history and Shakespeare's dramatized version have become so entwined in our cultural consciousness that separating them is like trying to unmix the colors on a painter's palette. Shakespeare's depiction of Caesar as a tragic hero, betrayed by his closest allies, has fueled the romantic and enduring myth of his life and death. The real-life Caesar was undoubtedly a complex figure, part statesman, part military genius, part egotist, but Shakespeare's portrayal has cemented an image of him as a larger-than-life character. It's a testament to the power of storytelling that a playwright from Stratford-upon-Avon could shape perceptions of a Roman general 2 millennia later. The famous line, "Et tu, brute," though likely apocryphal, has become shorthand for ultimate betrayal, illustrating how legends often overshadow facts. Yet, if we peel back the layers of drama, we find a man whose ambitions and reforms left a legacy that was both monumental and messy. Caesar's life is a reminder that history is written by those who weren't afraid to seize the quill and scribble their version of events. His influence on the Roman Empire and its subsequent leaders was profound. The transition from republic to empire under Augustus can be seen as a continuation of Caesar's vision, albeit with a more stable and enduring framework. Augustus took Caesar's blueprint, ironed out the wrinkles, and constructed a political structure that would endure for centuries. Economically, Caesar's conquests, particularly in Gaul, filled Rome's coffers and facilitated unprecedented wealth and expansion. His policies on debt and land reform attempted to address the economic disparities that plagued Rome, though they were as popular with the aristocracy as a tax audit. By expanding citizenship and integrating various peoples into the Roman fold, Caesar laid the groundwork for a more inclusive society, even if his methods were sometimes more stick than carrot. However, the question remains. Was Caesar a hero who transformed Rome for the better, or a despot who hastened its downfall? The truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in the middle. He was a man of his times who played the game of power with unmatched skill, yet his story echoes with the timeless themes of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal. His legacy is a double-edged sword, as sharp as the daggers that felled him, reminding us that the pursuit of power often comes at a steep price. In the end, Julius Caesar was not a mere footnote in history, but a chapter unto himself, a narrative of triumph and tragedy that continues to captivate our imagination. His life and legacy serve as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human folly. As you drift off into the realm of dreams, remember that history, like life, is rarely black and white. It's a mosaic of shades and hues, painted by those daring enough to leave their mark on the canvas of time. And in that complex tapestry, Caesar's story remains a vivid and enduring thread. Crete, circa 2000 BCE, was the disco ball of the ancient Mediterranean, a glimmering hub of trade and culture that had everybody from Egypt to the Near East shaking their hips to the beat of commerce. The Minoans, the island's star performers, knew how to work the stage. They weren't just trading olive oil and saffron. They were spinning a web of connections that would make any modern influencer green with envy. Now, you might have heard of the Minoans as the folks who built the labyrinth that housed the Minotaur. Sounds like the stuff of legends, right? Well, Here's where we start peeling away the mythos. Their true magic was less about mythical beasts and more about mastering the art of trade. Picture their bustling ports, Narsos, Phaistos, Malia, each one a gateway to the wider world, teeming with ships that had sailed the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean. The Minoans were the original hustlers of ancient commerce. They were trading with Egypt long before Cleopatra made black eyeliner a thing. By 2000 BCE, they were practically running a maritime empire. Their ships, sleek and swift, reached as far as the Levant and Anatolia. These weren't your average rowboats. We're talking cutting-edge technology for the time. Long, narrow vessels powered by both sails and oars. It's like they had Teslas of the sea when everyone else was still struggling with horse-drawn carts. But what exactly were they trading? Well, the Minoans had a knack for luxury that would make even the most extravagant Instagram influencer blush. Olive oil was their bread and butter, but not just any olive oil. This was the good stuff, the extra virgin, cold-pressed type that made Egyptian pharaohs sit up and take notice. Alongside it was saffron, a spice so pricey it made gold look like pocket change. And let's not forget the pottery, beautifully crafted pieces that were as much about style as they were about utility. So, what did all this trading achieve? For starters, it gave the Minoans the means to fund a civilization that seemed to prioritize aesthetics over practicality. Their palaces were sprawling complexes, adorned with frescoes of dolphins and ladies with snatched waists and cropped tops, truly ahead of their fashion game. The wealth funneled through these ports allowed them to live in a sort of ancient utopia, where art and architecture flourished like nowhere else in the ancient world. Yet, let's not get too misty-eyed. For all their sophistication, the Minoans were not immune to the harsh realities of their time. The Mediterranean was a dangerous place, a watery highway teeming with pirates and rival traders ready to cut you off at the pass. The Minoans had to be sharp, savvy, and sometimes a little ruthless to keep their networks running smoothly. And while their trade routes were extensive, they weren't invincible. Natural disasters, like the eruption of Thera, reminded them, and us, that Mother Nature always gets the final say. In the end, the Minoans' trade prowess was as much about survival as it was about luxury. They built a network that allowed them to thrive in a world where power was often measured by the size of your fleet. It's a testament to their ingenuity that we're still talking about them thousands of years later. Sure, the myths have their place, but the reality is far more compelling. They were the true navigators of their time, charting courses that would leave a lasting imprint on history. And as we dig deeper, we'll find that their legacy is more than just the sum of their trade goods. It's a story of connectivity, resilience, and the eternal human desire to explore beyond the horizon. If you thought the Minoans were just about trading luxury goods and throwing ancient toga parties, think again. Their true genius lay in their ability to harness the Mediterranean Sea as both a highway and a barrier. They weren't just paddling around in oversized canoes. They had an armada of what might be considered the ancient world's equivalent of Lamborghinis. Their ships were sleek, agile, and built for speed, cutting through the waters with the grace of a dolphin chasing its lunch. Let's get into the nuts and bolts, or should we say the planks and sails, of these maritime marvels. Minoan ships were typically long and narrow, averaging about 30 meters in length. They were designed with a keen understanding of hydrodynamics, making them swift and efficient. The hulls were crafted using a technique known as morais and tenon, which, for the uninitiated, sounds like something you'd order at an artisanal woodworking shop. It involved fitting wooden planks together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, securing them with wooden pegs. This made the vessels not only sturdy, but also flexible enough to withstand the Mediterranean's temperamental waves. Now, let's talk power. These ships were dual-powered, like the hybrid cars of today, but way cooler. They combined the energy of sails and oars, allowing them to zip across the water even when the wind was as fickle as your Wi-Fi connection. The sail, typically made from linen, could be adjusted to catch the wind from various angles, a nifty feature when you're trying to outmaneuver pirates or rival traders. Meanwhile, the oarsmen, likely a mix of sailors and conscripted labor, could row in unison, propelling the ship forward with a rhythm that would make any drummer jealous. But being a Minoan sailor wasn't all sunbathing on the deck and sipping ancient cocktails. Navigating the Mediterranean was a hazardous occupation, fraught with unpredictable storms, and yes, the occasional pirate attack. Forget the romantic notion of Minoans, as infallible seafarers equipped with mystical sea charts. In reality, their navigational skills were a mix of trial and error, a keen understanding of the coastline and the stars above. They didn't have GPS. They had the sun, the moon, and a healthy dose of nautical know-how passed down through generations. Yet, for all their skills, Minoan sailors weren't immune to mishaps. Shipwrecks happened, and while the romanticized tales often gloss over these failures, the archaeological evidence tells a different story. Wrecks have been discovered along trade routes, suggesting that even the best sailors sometimes misjudged the weather or encountered unexpected obstacles. These misadventures were part and parcel of their trade, a reminder that every successful voyage was a calculated risk. And what about the myth that the Minoans were the unrivaled masters of Mediterranean navigation? Well, let's pump the brakes on that one. They were good, very good in fact, but not invincible. The Phoenicians, coming onto the scene a few centuries later, would give them a run for their money, proving that the sea was an open arena for those daring enough to venture out. The Minoans were trailblazers, but they were part of an evolving maritime tradition that would continue to thrive long after their civilization faded. So, why does all this matter? Because understanding the logistics behind Minoan trade is key to appreciating their influence. They weren't just trading goods, they were connecting cultures, spreading ideas, and shaping the ancient world in ways that resonated for centuries. The ships they sailed were more than mere vessels. They were instruments of change, conduits of commerce, and yes, occasionally the setting for some nail-biting maritime drama. As we sail further into the story of the Minoans, remember that their legacy isn't just about the treasures they traded or the palaces they built. It's about their ability to navigate both the literal and metaphorical seas of their time, forging a network that would leave an indelible mark on history. So buckle up, or rather, batten down the hatches, because the journey is far from over, and there's plenty more to explore in the world of the Minoans. All right, so we've got the Minoans cruising the Med like they own the place, stacking up olive oil and saffron like it's ancient gold dust. But let's hit the pause button on this glamorous trade montage and take a look behind the curtain. Spoiler alert, it's not all sunshine and sea breezes on those Minoan ships. The reality is that the true engine of this ancient maritime empire wasn't just the sleek ships or the glittering goods. They had a labor force keeping the cogs turning, and trust me, it wasn't all voluntary service. The Minoan economy was a well-oiled machine, but it ran on the backs of a diverse workforce. Picture this, a blend of skilled craftsmen, enthusiastic sailors, and yes, a significant number of those who were more or less drafted into service. In the palaces of Knossos and beyond, artisans were crafting pottery and frescoes that would make a Renaissance artist weep. These artisans weren't just hobbyists with a penchant for painting dolphins. They were professionals, working in sprawling workshops, churning out high-quality goods that were shipped across the known world. But who kept these workshops humming with productivity? Enter the laborers, an unsung cohort of individuals who didn't exactly sign up for a glamorous career in pottery making. Some were locals, while others were likely brought in from overseas, perhaps as prisoners of war or through trade agreements that were heavy on the "you work for us now" clause. It's a tough pill to swallow, but the Minoan economic miracle had its less-than-rosy realities. Now, let's talk about the social and political fabric that held this bustling empire together. The Minoans weren't just winging it. They had a system, a hierarchy if you will. At the top, you had the elites, the bigwigs residing in palaces like Knossos. These were the decision-makers, the folks who called the shots and probably sipped on a bit too much wine while doing so. Below them, a class of administrators who were the ancient equivalent of middle management, ensuring that trade goods were logged and taxes collected. You can almost picture them, quill in hand, grumbling about inventory shortages and supply chain issues. What about the common folk, you ask? Well, they were the backbone of Minoan society, living in small towns and villages, farming, crafting, and generally ensuring the societal wheels didn't fall off. It wasn't all toil and trouble, though. The Minoans knew how to throw a festival or two, with feasts and athletic games that brought communities together. Imagine the excitement of the Minoan bull-leaping festivals. It's like the X Games of the Bronze Age, minus the skateboards, and plus a whole lot of adrenaline. But let's not gloss over the elephant, or should I say, the volcanic eruption, in the room. The Minoans, despite their flourishing civilization, were at the mercy of the elements. The Mediterranean is a geological hotspot, and natural disasters were as much a part of life as the trade winds. The most infamous of these was the eruption of Thera, present-day Santorini, around 1600 BCE. This wasn't just a little eruption. It was a colossal event, one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history. Picture a massive explosion, ash clouding the skies, and tsunamis rolling across the sea. The Minoans didn't have the luxury of early warning systems, and the impact was devastating. Ports were destroyed, trade routes disrupted, and the agricultural heartland of Crete likely suffered from ash fallout. It was like Mother Nature had flipped the board in the middle of a chess game, scattering pieces everywhere. For the Minoans, this meant scrambling to rebuild and reconnect their trade networks, all while dealing with the immediate aftermath of such a disaster. And here's where the mythos meets reality. Some speculate that this cataclysmic event might be the root of the Atlantis legend, a thriving civilization brought to its knees by nature's fury. It's easy to see how such tales would capture the imagination. But the truth is, the Minoans did what humans have always done. They adapted, they rebuilt, and they pressed on. The eruption didn't mark the end of the Minoans, but it was a serious setback, a stark reminder that even the mightiest civilizations are vulnerable to the whims of nature. In the end, the Minoan story is one of resilience, a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and innovate in the face of adversity. As we continue to peel back the layers of their history, remember that the Minoans were more than just traders. They were pioneers navigating a world as uncertain and unpredictable as our own. And while the myths add a certain glow, the reality is far richer, filled with the complexities and challenges of real people living in a world where the only constant was change. Stay tuned, because the Minoans have more secrets to share, and our journey through their fascinating world is far from over. And as we peer through the kaleidoscope of Minoan history, it's clear that their legacy is like a vibrant tapestry woven from the threads of cultural exchange. Their trade networks weren't just about moving goods from A to B. They were about soaking up influences like a sponge in an ancient Mediterranean bathtub. When the Minoans sailed their ships across the seas, they weren't just returning with exotic spices and precious metals. They were bringing back ideas, art, and religious practices that would influence their society in profound ways. Let's start with art, shall we? The Minoans were the original influencers, curating their public image with the finesse of a modern-day brand strategist. Their palaces were dripping with frescoes. Think of them as the Instagram stories of the Bronze Age. These weren't just pretty pictures to impress the neighbors. They were strategic displays of wealth and power. Dolphins frolicking on palace walls weren't just there to show off a love of marine life. They were a statement of mastery over the sea, a nod to their prowess in navigating and trading across the Mediterranean. And let's talk pottery. Minoan ceramics were the Louis Vuitton bags of their time, coveted, recognizable, and a status symbol across the ancient world. Their pottery was characterized by its intricate designs and vibrant colors, often depicting scenes of nature, religious rituals, or everyday life. But here's the kicker. Their pottery was more than just a vessel for olive oil or wine. It was a calling card, a way to project their cultural identity and sophistication to anyone who laid eyes on it, from the shores of Egypt to the bustling markets of the Levant. The Minoans were like the original content creators, each piece of pottery a post proclaiming, "Look at us, we've got style." And it worked. Their pottery was in high demand, traded far and wide, and it carried the Minoan brand wherever it went. You could say they were the ancient world's first lifestyle influencers, peddling an image of prosperity and cultural superiority that was as alluring as it was aspirational. But what about religion? Well, the Minoans were nothing if not eclectic in their spiritual tastes. Their pantheon was a melting pot of deities and symbols, a testament to the rich tapestry of influences they encountered in their trading escapades. They worshipped a mix of local gods and goddesses, often depicted in their art and sacred rituals, but they were also open to adopting foreign elements. For instance, they borrowed motifs from Egypt and the Near East, blending these with their own beliefs to create a unique religious tapestry. It was like they were crafting a bespoke belief system, picking and choosing elements that resonated with their worldview. This cultural cross-pollination didn't just stop at art and religion. It seeped into technology as well. The Minoans were early adopters of new technologies, especially those that could enhance their trade prowess. They were quick to embrace advancements in shipbuilding and navigation, constantly tweaking and improving their maritime capabilities. And let's not forget metallurgy. The Minoans were adept metal workers, crafting everything from weapons to jewelry with a finesse that spoke of influences from Anatolia and beyond. But let's also burst a bubble or two. While it's tempting to romanticize the Minoans as open-minded cosmopolitans sipping wine and discussing philosophy, the reality was a bit more transactional. This cultural exchange was often driven by necessity and survival rather than pure curiosity. They needed to keep up with their neighbors, to stay competitive in a world where falling behind could mean economic or even literal annihilation. It's the same old story, really. Adapt or die. And while we're myth-busting, let's address the idea that the Minoans were some kind of utopian society devoid of conflict. The truth is, this cultural exchange was as much about clashing ideas as it was about harmony. The Minoans were no strangers to conflict, whether it was internal power struggles or skirmishes with rival traders. The exchange of ideas was often a double-edged sword, bringing both enlightenment and tension. It was a dance of diplomacy and rivalry, a balancing act that required both savvy negotiation and, at times, brute force. Yet, despite these challenges, the Minoans managed to leave an indelible mark on the cultures they interacted with. Their influence can be seen in the art and architecture of ancient Greece and beyond. It's like they were the trendsetters of the Bronze Age, setting the stage for the cultural developments that would define the ancient world for centuries to come. So, as we continue to unravel the mysteries of the Minoans, remember that their legacy is one of complexity and contradiction. They were both artists and warriors, traders and monopolists, innovators and traditionalists. Theirs is a story of cultural exchange that transformed not only their own society, but also the entire Mediterranean world. And while the myths paint a picture of a lost paradise, the reality is far richer and more nuanced, a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity and the eternal quest for connection. As we delve deeper into their history, let's keep our eyes open for the surprises that await, because the tale of the Minoans is far from over. The Minoans, with all their glitz and glam, eventually met their match in the Mycenaeans, the ancient Greek upstarts who crashed the party with a vigor that would make any gate-crasher proud. While the Minoans were busy perfecting the art of fresco painting and pottery making, the Mycenaeans were sharpening their swords and gearing up for expansion. It was like watching a peaceful art gallery being overrun by a boisterous rock concert. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This wasn't an overnight hostile takeover. The Mycenaeans didn't just waltz in and snatch the Minoan crown. They played the long game, eventually overshadowing the Minoans through a combination of military might and strategic alliances. So, what went wrong for the Minoans? Was it the volcanic eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE that rocked their world, literally and figuratively? While the eruption certainly delivered a gut punch, it was more like opening the floodgates for further challenges. Picture a civilization already on shaky ground from natural disasters, and now facing an aggressive new player in the Mediterranean game. The Mycenaeans began flexing their muscles around 1450 BCE, and within a century, they'd gone from mere trade partners to dominant forces, absorbing much of what the Minoans had painstakingly built. Let's dig into the nitty-gritty. The Minoans' decline can be traced to a cocktail of factors: environmental upheavals, internal strife, and the inexorable rise of a militaristic, organized society in mainland Greece. The Mycenaeans were no slouches when it came to trade. They built on Minoan networks, essentially hijacking their maritime highways. The Minoan ports, once buzzing with activity, slowly saw their influence wane as Mycenaean ships, armed to the teeth, sailed confidently across the seas. It's like the Minoans were running a quaint mom-and-pop store, and the Mycenaeans rolled in with a corporate takeover. By 1400 BCE, Knossos, the jewel of the Minoan crown, fell under Mycenaean control. The records show a shift from the linear, a script of the Minoans, to the linear B script of the Mycenaeans, a subtle yet telling sign of who was now calling the shots. The Minoans, once the undisputed kings of Mediterranean trade, were now playing second fiddle in their own palace. It's a classic case of being outmaneuvered by a younger, hungrier competitor. But let's not write off the Minoans just yet. Even in decline, their influence was far-reaching. Their architectural innovations, such as the grand palatial complexes, left an indelible mark on the Mycenaeans. These structures weren't just about grandeur. They were a testament to Minoan engineering prowess, with intricate plumbing systems and vibrant frescoes that spoke of a civilization that valued both form and function. The Mycenaeans, recognizing a good thing when they saw it, adopted and adapted these elements, laying the groundwork for what would later blossom into classical Greek architecture. And speaking of influence, let's talk mythology. The Minoans may have faded from prominence, but their cultural and religious motifs seeped into Greek mythology. The labyrinth, the Minotaur, and the tales of King Minos, these stories found fertile ground in Greek culture, evolving and expanding over time. The Minoans might have been overshadowed, but their myths became immortalized in the tales told by their successors. It's like they handed the Greeks a narrative starter pack, and the Greeks ran with it, embellishing and expanding these stories into legends that still capture our imagination. As we reflect on the Minoans' legacy, it's tempting to ask, were they the real founders of the Mediterranean lifestyle? They certainly set the stage for a culture that celebrated art, architecture, and trade, laying the foundation for what would become the hallmark of Mediterranean societies. The Minoans were the original connoisseurs of a life balanced between sea and land, trade and tradition. Their influence on future civilizations is undeniable, particularly in how they navigated the complexities of a connected world. Fast forward to today, and the Minoan ethos of connectivity and cultural exchange resonates with the Mediterranean way of life. It's a lifestyle that values community, culinary delights, and a deep connection to the sea. The Minoans may have vanished, but their spirit lingers, a reminder that even the most ancient of civilizations can cast long shadows over the present. Their story is a testament to human adaptability, creativity, and the relentless drive to explore and connect, no matter the odds. In the grand tapestry of history, the Minoans were the weavers of a legacy that continues to influence and inspire. They were not just traders or builders. They were visionaries whose impact rippled across time. And while the Mycenaeans may have eclipsed them in the annals of history, the Minoan story is a poignant reminder that the true measure of a civilization lies not only in its conquests, but in the enduring footprints it leaves on the sands of time. So, as you drift off to sleep, dreaming of ancient palaces and bustling ports, remember the Minoans, a people who danced to the rhythm of the sea and left behind a legacy that still whispers through the waves of the Mediterranean. Here's to the Minoans, the original purveyors of a lifestyle that's as much about savoring the journey as it is about reaching the destination. Sleep tight and dream of frescoes and olive groves, of ships sailing into the horizon, and of a civilization that knew how to live life to the fullest.